Chapter 1126. Yungu, who had just returned to the Central Plains from Nanjiang, was in a good mood. She had never been so happy to travel around since she was a child. During this trip to Nanjiang, she had not only seen many unique herbs in Nanjiang, but Su Qingchen had also taken her to visit several famous doctors in Nanjiang. The medical skills and philosophies, which were very different from those in the Central Plains, made Yungu more enlightened on the road of medicine. After the two of them entered Shattered Snow Pass and returned to the Central Plains, they walked slowly westward towards West Hill. Although there was a big grudge between West Hill and the Prince Ding Mansion, both sides had stopped fighting and recuperated. West Hill people did not dare to attack young Master Qingchen easily. However, no one expected that something would happen before they reached An City, the current capital of West Hill. On this day, Yungu and Su Qingchen stayed in an inn in a small town near An City. Their destination was indeed the current capital of West Hill. As the right chief minister of the Prince Ding Mansion, Su Qingchen came to the capital of West Hill so casually without saying hello, which was somewhat provocative. However, An City was now the most prosperous and lively place in West Hill. It would be a pity if they did not go to West Hill after coming here. More importantly, the two of them planned to take the road from West Hill to the western region, so they had to pass through An City. Because of the tiredness from the previous day's journey, Yungu did not see Su Qingchen, who usually woke up earlier than her when she got up the next morning. Although it was a little strange, she did not think much about it. Su Qingchen did not know martial arts, so he was different from her. Maybe he was tired these days and fell asleep, which was rare. Yungu went down the stairs of the inn and went to the lobby downstairs to order some simple breakfast. Then he slowly ate it. However, after Yungu finished her breakfast and waited for a while, she found that something was wrong. Not only did Su Qingchen not appear, even the bodyguards who had been following them to protect them did not appear. They could not have all fallen asleep, right? Thinking of this, Yunji's heart suddenly jumped. She did not care about anything else and directly rushed upstairs. She pushed open Su Qingchen's room, only to see that it was clean and tidy as if no one had lived there at all. She went to check the rooms of the bodyguards, only to find that they had fainted and were unconscious in the room. Su Qingchen? Yungu immediately became anxious. She quickly detoxified the poison for the guards and asked anxiously, "What happened? Where is Su Qingchen?" The guards were at a loss at first, but when they heard Yunji's words they were shocked. He rushed into Su Qingchen's room and found that she was gone. How could this be? Young Master Qingchen was taken away by someone. A guard looked at the half-opened window and said in a low voice, "Quick, inform all the shadow guards to look for young Master Qingchen." "Okay." A shadow guard responded and quickly rushed out. Yungu only felt panic in her heart. Now that she was with Su Qingchen, she didn't have to worry about anything. Now that Su Qingchen had suddenly disappeared, she immediately felt at a loss. How could this be? Who would kidnap him? He doesn't have any enemies. Seeing the little girl sobbing, the shadow guard was suddenly at a loss and panicked. He quickly said, "Miss Shen, don't worry. Young Master Qingchen is a good person. He will be fine. By the way, the pavilion master of the West Hill Yanwang Chamber is a good friend of young Master Qingchen. Maybe we can ask him for information. As the saying goes, a strong dragon can't suppress a local snake. Although we have some people in the West Hill, they are definitely not as good as the Yanwang Chamber." After hearing the shadow guard's words, Yungu quickly wiped her tears and got up to walk out of the door. "Let's go. Su Qingchen doesn't know martial arts. What if he gets bullied?" The shadow guard behind her sighed helplessly. A rare look of guilt flashed across his determined face. Outside the Yanwang Chamber, sickly scholar looked at the girl in yellow in front of him with a sinister expression. He frowned and said, "Big brother is in seclusion. He won't see anyone." Yungu bit the corner of her lips, but still stubbornly stood in front of sickly scholar and refused to back down. "Isn't Pavilion Master Ling and Su Qingchen good friends? Su Qingchen is missing. I want to ask Pavilion Master Ling if there is any news." She also knew that it was rude to come to the Pavilion Master's door rashly, but for the sake of news about Su Qingchen, there was nothing she could do. Su Qingchen had been missing for almost 2 days. Whether it was the shadow guard of the Prince Ding Mansion or the Jinnan Palace of the West Hill, there was no news. This made Yungu more and more afraid. Sickly scholar sneered and said indifferently, the Yanwang chamber has long been disbanded. Even if Big Brother comes out to see you, he won't tell you any news. Nor, isn't Su Qingchen a member of the Prince Ding Mansion? The Prince Ding Mansion has spies all over the world. Do you still need the Yanwang chamber to take action? When the Yanwang chamber agreed to help Enchanting kill Yi Li, it sacrificed more than half of the masters of the Yanwang chamber. After returning, Ling Taihan ordered the Yanwang chamber to be disbanded. Although Ling Taihan said that he was tired of the Jianghu life and wanted to concentrate on martial arts, Sickly Scholar as his sworn brother, how could he not know that Ling Taihan did this to prevent the Prince Ding Mansion from having ambitions and to protect the remaining people of the Yanwang chamber? For a master like Ling Taihan, unless Mo Xiao personally led a team to encircle and suppress him, no one in the world could hurt him. However, the other people of the Yanwang chamber were different. Some of the second-rate and third-rate masters were simply food for the Prince Ding Mansion's cavalry. Although it was the Yanwang chamber that made the first move, the Yanwang chamber, which used to be famous all over the world, was now gone. It was impossible to say that there was no resentment in his heart. What's more, Sickly Scholar was not a magnanimous person. He was more than happy that Su Qingchen was missing. Go away. I want to see Pavilion Master Ling. I don't want to talk to you. After being stopped here for so long, even if Yungu was ignorant of worldly affairs, she could tell that this person was deliberately making things difficult for her. She was already upset because of Su Qingchen's safety. At this time her temper was even worse. She glared at Sickly Scholar and said angrily. Sickly Scholar's expression changed. He sneered and said, "You want to see Big Brother? Okay, I'll let you in if you beat me." Yungu was not long-winded. She pulled out a short sword and stabbed at Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar's weapon of choice was a short saber, and as soon as they clashed, the two of them immediately became entangled in a fight. Sickly Scholar was proficient in the art of poison. It was impossible to guard against him. Ordinary people in Jianghu were not willing to fight with him. However, Yungu was different. She was proficient in medicine. Since ancient times, there was a saying that medicine and poison were inseparable. After returning from the southern border this time, his understanding of poison arts had risen to a whole new level. Therefore, Sickly Scholar's poison did not have any effect on her. The two could only fight with their real abilities. Although Sickly Scholar was 10 years older than Yungu in terms of martial arts, he was not Yunji's opponent. Originally, among the 3 leaders of the Yanwang chamber, his aptitude and martial arts were the worst. In the early years he was plagued with illness. If it were not for his poison skills, his martial arts would only be second-rate. However, Yungu was a martial arts genius that even Mo Xiao praised. In less than a quarter of an hour, only Yungu was left suppressing Sickly Scholar. Chapter 1127. Third Brother, Stop. A deep male voice came from inside and a man in blue clothes walked out. Upon hearing his voice, Sickly Scholar immediately withdrew his attack and dodged to the side. Yungu also stopped her attack at the same time. It was because she could feel a vast and mighty aura that covered the sky and covered the earth the moment the man appeared. It was the same as when she was facing Prince Ding. Yungu knew very well that it was impossible for her to win against this man with her martial arts. You are Pavilion Master Ling? Although she was facing an expert she couldn't win against, Yungu didn't retreat. Ling Taihan looked at the little girl in front of him with interest. With his age, this little girl was a little young to be his daughter. Even Ling Taihan was very tolerant towards such a cute little girl. I am Ling Taihan. Little girl, your martial arts are not bad. What is your name? Yungu bit the corner of her lips and whispered, My name is Shin Yungu. I want to ask Pavilion Master Ling to help me check if there is any news about Su Qingchen. Seeing the unconcealable anxiety in Yunji's beautiful eyes, Ling Taihan shook his head. Seeing Yunji's charming smile slowly fade, Ling Taihan smiled and said, You don't have to worry. Su Qingchen will be fine. How do you know? Yungu asked. Ling Taihan smiled and said, With Su Qingchen's identity, there are not many people in the world who have the ability to kidnap him. Among them, there are almost no people who have a grudge against him. If you are really worried about him, you can go back to Glass City to take a look. Glass City? Yungu bit her lips. Glass City was too far from here. If she went back to Glass City to find Sister Li to save Su Qingchen, what if something happened to Su Qingchen during this time? Seeing the tears in the little girl's eyes, Ling Taihan sighed helplessly and said, Miss Shen, if you believe me, go back to Glass City to take a look. Maybe when you go back Su Qingchen is already in Glass City. If he was really kidnapped, and even the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce and Jinan Palace couldn't find any information, it would be useless for you to stay here. Why don't we go back first? Yungu nodded and quickly raised her hand to wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She said, I understand. Sorry for bothering you, Pavilion Master Ling. Thank you. With that, Yungu cupped her hands towards Ling Taihan before turning around and leaving. Big brother, are we just going to let this girl go like that? Sickly Scholar said with some displeasure as he watched Yunji's figure gradually disappear. Ling Taihan laughed heartily. Then he raised his hand and patted his sworn younger brother's shoulder. He said with a smile, she's just a 15 or 16-year-old girl. You still have the nerve to bully her. Moreover, third brother, it's not that big brother is looking down on you, but if it's really one-on-one, you definitely won't be this girl's match. I didn't expect Su Qingchen to find such an innocent girl. Who exactly kidnapped Su Qingchen? Sickly Scholar asked with a frown. Previously he didn't reject Yungu completely out of spite. It was because the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce really didn't have any news of Su Qingchen. Ling Taihan smiled. In this world, who else but Emo Xiao can kidnap Su Qingchen and also have the ability to help him? In a secluded corner not far from Yungu, there was an inconspicuous carriage. The man sitting in the carriage was incomparably handsome. His clothes were as white as snow and he looked like an immortal. However, at this moment, the expression on his face didn't have the slightest bit of immortal aura. Instead, it made the person opposite him shudder uncontrollably. Opposite him, the Su family's third son, Su Qingfeng, who had just been married for 2 months, looked at the person opposite him with a helpless expression. Big brother, don't look at me. I'm just following orders. If you're angry, then go find the person who gave the order. He finally got married and married a beautiful girl. Didn't he want to enjoy the happiness of being a newlywed at home? Why did he have to come all the way to this godforsaken place and be hated by his big brother? Emo Shuyao. Young Master Qingchen lowered his eyes. He didn't even need to think to know who came up with this rotten idea. When he woke up and found that he was kidnapped, young Master Qingchen didn't panic. Sure enough, he soon saw his third brother appear in front of him with a timid expression. He smiled apologetically at him with a guilty conscience. Needless to say, there was no one else who could come up with such a shameful idea other than someone in Glass City. At least Su Qingfeng didn't have the guts to act on his own. Su Qingfeng nodded repeatedly. Being sent out to carry out such a ridiculous task, he also complained in his heart. Helplessly, as the other party's subordinate, he could only choose to obey orders. However, in his heart he couldn't wait for his big brother to go back and find trouble with someone. Big brother, it seems that Miss Shen is also very good to you. Through the curtains of the car window, Su Qingfeng saw Miss Yungu, who had just left the Yanwang chamber. Her eyeballs were about to fall out, but she didn't stop walking forward. For the past 2 days they had been secretly following Yungu. Naturally, they had seen clearly what Yungu had done. Unfortunately, although Yunji's martial arts were strong, her experience in the underworld was close to zero. Naturally, she couldn't discover Su Qingfeng, who had undergone professional training. Looking at the lonely figure of the little girl in the distance, Su Qingchen's eyes flashed with a trace of pity and heartache. He said in a low voice, "Are you done? Let me down." Su Qingfeng shook his head repeatedly and said, "That won't do. The order I received was to bring you back. Also, big brother, don't you want to see how much Miss Shen cares about you?" Su Qingchen was silent. Young Master Qingchen had always been a perfectionist. However, Miss Yungu was really a little slow when it came to feelings. Although Yungu had now completely accepted the fact that she was his fiancée, it was still because of the affection between them. Even he himself didn't know how much of it was because of her feelings for him. But, thinking of that pair of sparkling eyes filled with tears, young Master Qingchen only felt a throbbing pain in his heart. Let me down. In the end, his heartache for Yungu exceeded his desire to know the answer. Young Master Qingchen gave up this opportunity without hesitation. Su Qingfeng helplessly rolled his eyes. He smiled flatteringly at young Master Qingchen and said, "If that's the case, big brother, I'm sorry." With a raise of his hand, Su Qingfeng knocked young Master Qingchen unconscious in the carriage. With young Master Qingchen's intelligence, It was best to knock him unconscious and bring him back to Glass City directly. Otherwise, even if he couldn't move, who knew what kind of trouble he would cause along the way. Thinking of Prince Ding's earnest instructions before leaving, although Su Qingfeng was very disdainful, he had to admit that it was very reasonable. Yungu rushed to Glass City day and night. However, because she was blocked by two groups of people on the way when she finally returned to Glass City, she was 2 days later than the expected journey. Thinking that Su Qingchen's life and death were still unknown, Yungu couldn't help but hate herself for being useless. If she was as powerful as Sister Li Er, she would definitely be able to find Su Qingchen and not come back dejectedly to ask Sister Li Er for help. However, the scene after entering Glass City made Yungu feel a little lost. The Prince Ding mansion was peaceful and quiet, as if nothing had happened. She had clearly sent a few shadow guards who were following Su Qingchen back to Glass City to report. She then caught a servant of the Prince Ding mansion and asked. The servant actually said that the prince and the princess were not in the mansion. They had gone to the Su family because the eldest son of the Su family, young Master Qingchen, was getting married and the wedding was set for today. Chapter 11:28. Yungu was stunned. She couldn't figure out what was going on. She said in a daze, So, Su Qingchen is fine? The servant looked at her strangely and replied, What can happen to young Master Qingchen? Young Master Qingchen is very capable. Then, when did Su Qingchen come back? Young Master Qingchen came back yesterday. It just so happens that Miss Shen has also come back. She can make it in time for young Master's wedding. After the servant finished speaking with a chuckle, he bowed to Yungu and left. Yungu sat in a daze at the entrance of the Prince Ding mansion. The guards at the entrance all knew this girl and didn't bother her. Thinking about how she had been living in the open all these days and how she had been robbed, Yungu couldn't help but feel wronged and her eyes reddened. Even if Su Qingchen didn't want her anymore, he didn't have to come back secretly to get married. He should have at least left her a message. This was too much. Thinking about how Su Qingchen had secretly come back to get married, Yungu felt even more upset. Liar. Big liar. He said he would accompany me to practice medicine and have fun. What fiancé and fiancé? Su Qingchen was a big liar. The little girl's aggrieved expression made even the guards at the entrance unable to look straight at her. Finally, they couldn't help but ask, Miss Shen, what happened to you? Who bullied you? Could it be that the little girl was really bullied? Should they quickly report to the princess consort? The princess consort seemed to like this little girl. Yungu blinked and nodded silently. What if someone lied to you? Beat him. Guard A said. Beat him up. Guard B said. Kick him. Guard D kill him. Guard C said. Yunji's pretty little face showed hesitation. She said hesitantly, No, he can't stand it. What if I break him? The guards looked at each other. She was already so upset and yet she was still worried about breaking him. It seemed like she had a conflict with her lover. Miss Shen, maybe he didn't lie to you on purpose. If you have any doubts, you should ask him clearly. Otherwise, you will regret it for the rest of your life if you miss out on the person you love. Someone I love. Yunji's little face turned red. That's right. He lied to you and made you so sad, but you still can't hit him. Isn't he your sweetheart? Yunji's little face blushed and began to turn pale. Then, what if he doesn't want me anymore and goes to be with someone else? Take it back and make him change his mind. Bodyguard A said. Take him back. If he doesn't change his mind, beat him to death. Guard B said. Snatch him back. If he doesn't change his mind, feed him poison and poison him to death. Bodyguard third said. Snatch. Just as the third bodyguard opened his mouth, Yungu had already turned around and said with a smile, Got it, we'll talk after we snatch it back. Yungu did not enter through the front door of the Su family. Instead, he leaped over the wall and went straight to Su Qingchen's courtyard. The Su estate was indeed bustling with noise and excitement. There were lanterns and colored banners everywhere, and the outer courtyard was bustling with activity. In comparison, the inner court was much quieter. Just as she reached the door of Su Qingchen's room, she could faintly hear Su Qingchen's voice coming from inside. Lady Yungu was instantly enraged and lifted her leg to kick Su Qingchen's door. Yunj, why are you here? Come with me. Murong Ting's voice suddenly came from behind. Yungu was stunned. Before she could react, Murong Ting and Hua Tianxiang each grabbed one of her hands and dragged her away. Sister Tianxiang, what are you doing? I'm looking for Su Qingchen. Yungu said angrily. Qin Jing followed beside her and covered her mouth with a smile. What nonsense are you saying? Today is a big day, how can you see the groom now? Come with us, we've been looking for you everywhere. Looking for me? Yungu, who did not know what was going on, was dragged out of Su Qingchen's courtyard by Murong Ting and Hua Tianxiang into another courtyard in a daze. Then many familiar and unknown people rushed up to help her change her clothes, put on her makeup and tie her hair. In the end, she was covered by a red veil and went out to perform the wedding ceremony in a daze. From beginning to end, Yungu was in a daze. She did not know what was going on at all. By the time Yungu came back to her senses, she had already performed the ceremony and was sent to the bridal chamber. Under the red veil of mandarin ducks playing in the water, Yungu blinked in confusion and raised her hand to remove the veil on her head. Only to hear a creak from the door was pushed open and then closed. A light footstep walked in her direction. For some reason, Yungu suddenly became a little nervous. Her palms, which were originally holding the red wedding dress tightly, were full of sweat. Her eyes lit up and her red veil was gently lifted. Yungu raised her head and saw a man in a bright red robe in front of her. There was a faint smile on his immortal-like handsome face. His entire person was set off by the festive red, making him look even more noble and joyful. Su Qingchen? Su Qingchen smiled faintly and lowered his body to plant a light kiss on her lips. He said with a smile, "It's me, Yungu. Are you happy that we got married today?" Happy. Yungu could not help but want to glare at him fiercely. However, under his gentle gaze, her cheeks seemed to be burning. She could not help but feel a trace of joy and sweetness in her heart. It turned out that Su Qingchen did not want her anymore. He did not want to secretly marry someone else. As long as you're happy. Young Master Qingchen smiled faintly and said, "From now on, Yungu is my wife. Come, let's drink a cup of nuptial wine first." Young Master Qingchen handed over a wine cup and looked at Yungu with a smile. Facing his smiling handsome face, Yungu only felt dizzy in her head. She raised her wine cup in a daze and crossed her arms to drink together. A cup of nuptial wine. From now on, they were bound by wings and branches and grew old together. Under the bright candles, the couple raised their cups and drank together. There was a faint smile and tenderness in their eyes. The sound of firecrackers came from afar. The melodious sound of musical instruments and the hubbub of voices made this place even more tranquil. At this moment, the flowers were fragrant and the moon was shady. Chapter 11:29. Alluring dance. Yaoji was 10 years old when she became a dancer. Before that, she was the daughter of a 4th-grade official, though she was not a noble. She was neither too young nor too old. She was the daughter of a famous family. However, there were all kinds of conflicts in the imperial court. When her father committed a felony and the whole family was confiscated, she was not willing to mention her former name after she fell into the musical house. Just like when she was 13, Yaoji officially welcomed guests. After a dance in the alluring house, she became the #1 dancer in the Chu capital. It was also on that day that Yaoji met Muyang. It was the time when a girl of 13 or 14 years old had her first awakening of love, even in a place like the alluring house. Though she had just started to receive guests, Yaoji had been in the alluring house for more than 2 years. Naturally, she had seen enough of the sisters in the alluring house being heartbroken for men. When she saw Muyang for the first time, Yaoji was not moved. At that time Muyang was only 18 years old. He was young and handsome and white. It was the time when he was riding a horse, leaning against a slanted bridge and full of red sleeves. That day after the dance, Yaoji was a little breathless and nervous. Today was the first day of her performance, which was also related to her life in the next few years. If she succeeded, she would become a new dancer in the alluring house, and then be a pure and noble girl who was admired by everyone. If she failed, even if she was as beautiful as a fairy, she could only do the inferior sex business like many unknown sisters. Women were always particularly naive and persistent in this aspect. They knew that it would be the same in the end, but they still wanted to seize the opportunity in the next few years. Maybe it would be different. "Miss, are you all right?" In the cheers, Yaoji hurried down the stage and went to her residence in the backyard. Because she was too smart, she passed by a man and lost her balance. She almost bumped into the wall beside her. Just when Yaoji thought she was going to be disfigured, a hand circled her waist, brought her back and asked in a low voice. Yaoji was stunned. As soon as she looked up, she saw the man in white in front of her. He was handsome and had an extraordinary temperament. She looked at him with a faint smile in her eyes, but unlike many other guests who always had a trace of annoyance, there was only a faint worry and warmth. "I'm fine. Thank you for your help." Yaoji pushed his hand away and bowed slightly. "My name is Mu Yang. Miss, you dance very well." The man smiled. Yaoji suddenly realized that she had heard of Mu Yang's name before. The heir of Marquis Mu Yang's mansion was also a well-known and ambitious aristocratic family in the capital city. Although the sisters in Qingqing Lane often mentioned him, they had only heard of his name because Mu Yang had never set foot in a brothel. Naturally, Yaoji did not expect to see him in such a place. Looking at the handsome man in front of her, Yaoji frowned slightly. Although many people lived up to their reputations, it was disappointing to see such a handsome young man frequenting brothels. Seeming to understand Yaoji's gaze, Mu Yang smiled bitterly and said, "I came here with some friends. This Qingqing Lane is really not small. May I know where Changyun Pavilion is?" Changyun Pavilion was where the most famous courtesan in Qingqing Lane, Miss Changyun, lived. Yaoji nodded and pointed him in the direction. The reason why Mu Yang came here had nothing to do with her. The change in her expression at that moment was just a little surprise because the news she heard was different from the reality. "Oh, isn't this our young master Mu?" A melodious male voice with a hint of playfulness rang out from behind. They turned around and saw a man in red strolling toward them. "Young Master Feng San." The young Mu Yang was not bad-tempered. He greeted the man in red very politely. Young Master Feng San was a frequent visitor to brothels. Although Yaoji had never seen him, she had heard of him for a long time. Feng San was the son of a concubine of the richest family in the Chu capital, while Mu Yang was the heir of Marquis Mu Yang's mansion. With Mu Yang's status, it was definitely polite for him to take the initiative to greet Feng San. But Feng San obviously did not appreciate it. He raised his sword-like eyebrows and looked at Mu Yang with a faint smile. "It's really rare. I didn't expect Heir Mu to have such a refined interest. Isn't this Miss Yaoji? Miss Yaoji's dance is so beautiful. I really admire you." Feng San's words were a little flippant, but it was not excessive in such a place. Mu Yang was already considered a handsome and elegant man, but Feng San's appearance was even more handsome than his. The mocking smile on his lips made him look even more unruly. It was not just because of Feng San's appearance but something else. Although his words were deliberately flirting, Yaoji did not dislike it. Young Master Feng San, who was dressed in red, was indeed a person who was hard to dislike. Mu Yang did not argue with Feng Jiao. He just smiled faintly and said, "I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. Miss Yaoji, goodbye." "Heir Mu, take care," Yaoji said faintly. She glanced at Mu Yang's figure leaving Cloud Pavilion, then turned around and threw it to the back of her mind. After that day, Yaoji and Mu Yang did not have much interaction, but gradually became familiar with Feng Jiao. It was hard not to be familiar with Feng San in Qingqing Lane, because young Master Feng San lived in Qingqing Lane for at least half a month every month. In Qingqing Lane, there was even a room specially reserved for young Master Feng San, and there were many rooms like this in other places in the capital. After interacting with Feng San for a long time, Yaoji gradually understood that young Master Feng San was not a playboy or a pervert in the eyes of others. Because when they met in private, Feng Jiao's eyes were always clear and calm, without a trace of fluctuation. Because young Master Feng San often supported her, and because Yaoji's dancing skills were indeed the best in the capital, Yaoji firmly held the title of the #1 courtesan in the capital in just 2 months. She was in the limelight for a while. The next time she met Mu Yang was at the beginning of the 2nd year. At that time, Mu Yang was still the most proud heir of Marquis Mu Yang's residence, and Yaoji was already famous as the #1 dancer in the capital. Even many influential members of the imperial family in the capital had invited her to perform. To see her alone, one needed to spend a lot of money. Meeting Mu Yang again was an accident. Yaoji became the #1 courtesan in the capital, and naturally stole the limelight from the original courtesan of Qingqing Lane, Chang Yun. It was inevitable to be hated by others, so Yaoji had always been very quiet. With their background, they did not have the qualifications to be pure, But Yaoji did not expect that Chong Yun would collude with the girls of Qingqing Lane to ruin her chastity when they went out for a walk. Chastity seemed to be a joke to people like them, but it was also very important. Now she could be the #1 courtesan and chat with others was worth a lot of money. But once she lost this, she would soon be reduced to the same situation as an ordinary prostitute. Yaoji naturally did not want to be like this, so the moment she felt uncomfortable she endured the pain and hid. Chapter 11:30. Miss, are you all right? A faint voice, with a trace of familiar worry, came from behind the rockery where she was hiding. However, this relationship was no different from arsenic poison to the current her. I'm fine. Without looking at the person behind her, Yaoji stood up and staggered forward. Miss Yaoji. Mu Yang was a little worried and pulled Yaoji. Seeing her flushed cheeks, he suddenly realized, What's wrong with you? I'll ask someone to call a doctor. Yaoji, who was already swaying unsteadily, fell into Mu Yang's arms when Mu Yang pulled her. Yaoji only felt that her mind was in a mess. She grabbed Mu Yang's hand and gritted her teeth to maintain the last trace of consciousness. It's too late. It's too late. I remember there's a pool in front. Throw me in. But Mu Yang frowned. Although it was spring now, it was still the end of February. The pool was a little cold for men, not to mention women. It's okay. I can swim. Please. Mu Yang was also a son of an aristocratic family and had seen many private tricks. Seeing Yaoji so insistent, he nodded and said, In that case, I'm sorry to offend you. That day, Yaoji fell into the water and was saved by Marquis Mu Yang's son. He was sick for a month. But Yaoji also fell in love with that gentle and cheerful young man. He not only helped her but also saved her life. In the following years, Yaoji's reputation grew. With the support of young Master Feng San, Marquis Mu Yang's son, and other sons of nobles in the capital, no one dared to make trouble in Qingqing Lane. When Yaoji was 20 years old, she officially became the owner of Qingqing Lane and no longer received guests. She only danced when the nobles in the capital or even the palace needed her to perform. The rest of the time she sat alone on the second floor of Qingqing Lane and looked at the bustling downstairs indifferently. Miss Marquis Mu Yang is here. Outside the door, a maid reported in a low voice. Yaoji turned around and said with a faint tiredness on her enchanting face, Please go back, Marquis Mu Yang. I won't see any guests. Seeing the maid leave with a little surprise, Yaoji smiled faintly. In the blink of an eye, they had known each other for almost 10 years. Yaoji couldn't remember when they started dating. Her own Feng Jiao had once smiled and sighed, Yaoji, falling in love with someone like Mu Yang, you're really asking for trouble. Whether it's sentiment or reason, you should also choose this young master. At that time Yaoji just smiled faintly. How could she not know that with Mu Yang's identity, there would be no connection between them at all? On the contrary, Feng Jiao, who was born a concubine of a rich family, would have less pressure. However, she had never felt her heart flutter in front of the handsome young Master Feng San. Because she knew that young Master Feng San already had someone in his heart. And Mu Yang only had eyes for her. However, such days couldn't last long. Although he had already passed his prime, he still refused to get married. However, 2 months ago he finally couldn't withstand the pressure from the Mu family and got engaged to the young lady of the Sun family. After that, Yaoji was not surprised that Miss Sun, who was his fiancée, came to her. Thinking of what Princess Ding said at the Fenghua building yesterday, Yaoji smiled bitterly and a trace of determination flashed across her beautiful face. Even though she had only seen Ding Wangfei twice, Yaoji had to admit that no matter what, that Wangfei was someone she envied. She had a noble background, a husband who could shelter her from the wind and rain wholeheartedly, an open-minded mind, and an ability and intelligence that were different from ordinary women. She should let go when she wanted to. Perhaps she really should leave. Yaoji lowered her head and stroked her still flat belly with a faint smile. Princess Ding was right. As long as she wanted to live well, she could always live a good life. Moreover, she was not alone now. Yaoji. There was a flurry of footsteps outside the door. Soon, Mu Yang appeared at the door and looked at her with an unsightly expression. The servants of Qingqing Lane followed Mu Yang worriedly. Obviously, they didn't dare to stop the heir of Marquis Mu Yang's residence. Yaoji waved her hand to let the servants leave. Looking at him, she smiled faintly and said, What do you mean by this? Although Qingqing Lane is a brothel, Yaoji hasn't received guests for many years. Yaoji. Haven't you had enough? What happened at the Fenghua building yesterday made Mu Yang very unhappy. However, his years of relationship with Yaoji weren't fake, so he immediately came to Qingqing Lane to find her as soon as he calmed down. He didn't expect to be refused at the door. Yaoji sneered and said, "I've had enough. Please don't come to Qingqing Lane in the future. Otherwise you might run into Mrs. Sun and Miss Sun on the street." "What do you mean?" Mu Yang frowned. Yaoji waved her hand and shook her head. "Nothing. Please go back." Looking at Yaoji's silent expression, Mu Yang sighed helplessly and said, "Yaoji, I'm doing this for our future. Marquis Mu Yang's residence. It's impossible for me to marry you as my legal wife. Can't you suffer a little for my sake?" Yaoji looked at him calmly and said, "I'm not used to suffering and you don't have to. I hope your highness can take into account our many years of friendship and let us part on good terms." Knowing Yaoji's temper, it was impossible to persuade her in a short time. Mu Yang could only sigh and said in a low voice, "I'll go back first. Think about it carefully." Looking at his back, Yaoji suddenly said, "Mu Yang, after so many years, we've both changed. Don't come here in the future. You're no longer the gentle and candid young man, and I'm no longer the young girl who only wanted love. We've both grown up and changed." Mu Yang's body paused for a moment before he left silently. "Miss." Outside the door, the servant girl looked worriedly at Yaoji, who was a little absent-minded. Yaoji came to herself and smiled faintly. "Pack up. I'm going out." "Where are you going?" "Prince Ding Mansion." Coming out of the Prince Ding Mansion, Yaoji breathed a long sigh of relief. Selling Qingqing Lane to Princess Ding, Yaoji didn't know if it was an impulse, but when she really did it, she didn't feel as reluctant as she imagined. With the money earned from these years in selling Qingqing Lane, it was enough for her to live in luxury for the rest of her life. Finding a quiet place, giving birth to the child and raising it well, she might find a different happiness in her life. Wasn't this the peaceful life she had always hoped for? "Miss, take care." The man who followed Yaoji out said in a deep voice. The man's deep voice sounded very pleasant, but Yaoji was a little surprised that he would say goodbye to her. She had seen this man twice around Princess Ding. He wasn't an ordinary guard and seemed to have a high status. Shouldn't such a person be very disdainful to people like her? Or was it that the people around Princess Ding were really different? "Thank you." Yaoji choked. She didn't know this man's name. "Thank you, sir." In front of this silent man, Yaoji found that the social skills she had learned in Qingqing Lane all these years seemed to be completely useless. She couldn't even put on a smile on her face, so she could only express her gratitude in an unembarrassed manner. The man looked at her calmly and said, "I'm Qin Feng. Miss, your body isn't well. If you want to go on a long journey, you'd better wait for some time." Yaoji was stunned for a moment, then she nodded and said, "Thank you for reminding me, Commander Qin. I'll take my leave." "I won't see you out," Qin Feng said indifferently. Yaoji smiled faintly, then turned around and left in a natural and unrestrained manner. She naturally understood Qin Feng's reminder and concern. Her gloomy mood these days because of these things had improved a lot. If he could show some concern to a stranger he didn't know, there must be many good people in this world. After leaving Chujing, she might not be so sad. At least from now on, she was no longer a dancer but an ordinary person. This was actually what she had wanted all along, wasn't it? When she sold Qingqing Lane to Princess Ding used Princess Ding's power to change her household register. Since then, the music register that she had been brooding about was no longer there. Yaoji was just a single mother with a child. Chapter 1131. In a courtyard on the outskirts of the Chu capital, under the faint sunlight, a beautiful but slightly thin and pale woman sat under a tree with a baby in her arms. The baby in her arms was more than 3 months old. Compared to the wrinkled appearance when he was just born, his little face was now white and tender. A pair of big watery eyes looked at the woman holding him and giggled. The woman lowered her head and looked at the baby in her arms. A faint smile appeared on her originally hesitant face. "Miss Yaoji, madam and young madam are here." At the door, a woman who looked like a maid reported in a deep voice. Although she was a maid, she looked at the woman under the tree without the slightest respect. Instead, she was full of contempt and disgust. Yaoji had long been used to such gazes and didn't care. In the eyes of these people, She was just a shameless woman who seduced the heir of Marquis Muyang's mansion. Yaoji lowered her head as if she didn't hear her. Since she was caught in June when she was pregnant, the madam of Marquis Muyang's family took away all her belongings and she lost her freedom. When she was about to give birth, she almost died in an avalanche. Even Yaoji didn't expect that the seemingly gentle and well-educated young madam of Marquis Muyang's mansion would be so vicious. After going through so much, Yaoji became more and more bitterly disappointed. She completely despaired of these so-called rich and powerful people. The maid said she was here to report, but she didn't say she was here to inform. Seeing that Yaoji didn't speak, she didn't care and left directly. Sure enough, a group of people came in after a while. Madame of Marquis Muyang frowned and looked at the charming Yaoji in white, her eyes full of disgust. Born in a noble family, she naturally hated these enchanting women the most, not to mention that this woman had hooked her son's heart. The young madam of Marquis Muyang's mansion, who had just entered the family for a few months, was even more jealous. Yaoji's appearance could be ranked in the top 5 even in the entire capital city. In the past, when she wore a red dance dress in Qingqing Lane, she had attracted praise from all sides at the banquet in the palace. Even though she had lost a lot of weight and was dressed in white without any makeup, she was more elegant and proud like a lotus flower. How could young Madame Mu, the young lady of the Sun family, compare to her? Originally, this young Madame Mu had a scholarly and elegant temperament, which made Yili secretly praise her in her heart. However, after getting married, her life was filled with jealousy and viciousness. She had long abandoned her last advantage. Now it seemed that she was just a mean and vicious young woman. How dare you? Don't you even know how to salute? The madam of the Marquis Muyang's mansion reprimanded in a deep voice. Yaoji raised her head and said indifferently, "You two didn't come in person but still asked the master to bow?" Young Madame Mu shrieked, "What kind of master are you? This is Marquis Muyang's residence." Yaoji said, "It's true that I'm not the master, but neither is young Mistress Mu. This was Mu Yang's private courtyard." Obviously, Mu Yang did not recognize the young madam's right to own her own private property. "Young Madame Mu, do you still remember? When you almost starved me and Jing and to death, Mu Yang had ordered that you and Jing and were not allowed to take a step into this place. As for me, if Madame Mu is willing to let me go, Yaoji will be very grateful. I think the money you took from me should be enough to pay for these days, right?" Marquis Muyang's and young Madame Mu's faces were both green and white. Young Madame Mu was purely angry, while Marquis Muyang was more embarrassed and angry. Zhang family took away all of Yaoji's property, and a large part of it fell into her hands. Yaoji naturally made a lot of money these years. When she sold Qingqing Lane to Prince Ding Mansion, Yili did not take advantage of Yaoji. The price she gave was absolutely fair. In addition, Yaoji was given all kinds of treasures by many celebrities, refined scholars, princes and dignitaries. If it was really valued, it was worth at least 300,000 to 400,000 taels of silver. Such a large sum of money, even for a noble family like Marquis Muyang's residence, it was absolutely a huge sum of money. After a long while, Marquis Muyang stood up and gritted her teeth, "If you want to leave, then leave. But you must keep the child." Although the child's mother came from a dishonorable background, he was the first grandchild of Marquis Muyang's residence. Since Sun did not make any move after Muyang got married for so long, Marquis Muyang naturally valued this child more. Moreover, the bloodline of Marquis Muyang's residence could not be left outside. "Don't even think about it." Yaoji stood up with the child in her arms and stared at Marquis Muyang warily. She suddenly sneered, "If you don't want to leave, then leave. I'm not afraid of you. Even if I don't have a status here, Muyang will still provide for me with good food and luxurious clothes. If I think it through one day, it's fine for me to enter the residence as a concubine. With my beauty, do you think I'm afraid of an average-looking woman? I just don't know. If Prince Muyang married a dancer, will he be a laughingstock? You're shameless." Young Madame Mu's face suddenly changed. Yaoji was living in another courtyard now, and Muyang often refused to go home. If this mother and son were brought back to the residence, would there be a place for her in Marquis Muyang's residence? Yaoji faintly lifted her lips and smiled beautifully. "You flatter me. I'm not as good as someone." The mocking tone was so obvious that Marquis Muyang couldn't pretend not to understand it. How could Marquis Muyang, who had always been high and mighty in front of Yaoji, tolerate the mockery of a dancer? She said angrily, "You bitch. I'd like to see if I can control you or not. So what if Muyang dotes on you? I'm Muyang's mother after all. Yaoji sneered. So what if you're Muyang's mother? Is it that rare? If it was before when she had a strong relationship with Muyang, she might have some scruples about Muyang. But now, as early as when she was almost killed by young Madame Mu during childbirth, and when she and the child almost starved to death some time ago, she had already given up on Muyang. It was not because Muyang refused to avenge her and the child. She understood that Muyang cared about Marquis Muyang's residence and son family. What she hated the most was that Muyang still refused to let her go even though he knew that it was dangerous for her and the child to stay in the Chu capital. She didn't know and didn't want to know whether it was because Muyang was confident that he could protect her and the child, or because in Muyang's eyes her and the child's lives were not that important. But now, her heart was completely cold towards Muyang. Compared to her son, their love in the past had long become a thing of the past. Guards! Drag this woman out and beat her hard. Marquis Muyang shouted. Who dares? The servants around were about to take action when Muyang quickly walked in from outside and shouted sternly. Muyang walked into the courtyard and glanced at young Madame Mu who was standing beside Marquis Muyang. He said angrily, "It's you again." Young Madame Mu lowered her head bitterly. Although it was indeed she who instigated her mother-in-law to come here, her husband's attitude of reprimanding her without even asking hurt her. It wasn't that she didn't want to be a virtuous wife, but when Yaoji went missing, Muyang went to the battlefield without saying a word. After that, Marquis Muyang's residents found Yaoji, and Muyang came back and married her. However, no matter what she did, he was always indifferent to her. She was just a newly married woman in her teens. How could she bear it? Chapter 1132. Yaoji sneered and sneered. Is the crown prince blind? It wasn't young Madame Mu who wanted to hit me. Muyang frowned and looked at Yaoji helplessly. Yaoji, who was talking and laughing, suddenly changed her expression. She raised her hand and slapped Muyang hard in the face. Not only did Muyang's face turn to the side, but it also made Marchioness Muyang and young Madame Mu cry out in shock. Yang, bitch. Marchioness Muyang was furious. Muyang hurriedly stopped his mother who was about to fly into a rage. He said to Yaoji with a gloomy expression, "Are you appeased now?" Yaoji pursed her lips and smiled, but her smile was extremely cold. Appeased? You must be joking. Since you said you want to marry me, Yaoji has a question even though my life is cheap. Muyang was delighted, thinking that Yaoji had relented. He hurriedly said, "Ask away." Yaoji held the child with one hand and pointed at Matriarch Mu, asking, "If Yaoji is killed by Marchioness Muyang one day, what are you going to do?" Muyang's expression changed slightly. "Yaoji, what nonsense are you talking about? How could my mother?" Yaoji sneered and raised her eyebrows. "Why don't you ask Marchioness Muyang if she was going to kill me just now?" Muyang turned to look at Marchioness Muyang, only to see her stiffly turn her face away. His heart couldn't help but sink. Yaoji smiled brilliantly. "It's fine if you want to marry me as a concubine. Based on your sincerity, Yaoji will use my life to stop you. As long as you swear in front of everyone in the capital that if Yaoji dies an unnatural death one day, you will personally kill her in front of her coffin, and she will still be my subordinate. How about it?" Yang. Marchioness Muyang and young Madame Mu both tried to stop him. Looking at their ugly expressions, Yaoji smiled mockingly and turned to enter the room with the child, ignoring how noisy Marchioness Muyang and young Madame Mu were outside. When Muyang finally saw his mother and wife off, he returned to his room and saw Yaoji standing in front of the window thinking about something. A trace of guilt flashed through Muyang's eyes as he sighed in a low voice. "Yaoji, why are you doing this? Why would you say something like that? I know, you're not that kind of person." Yaoji sneered. "You're wrong. I'm that kind of person. If I don't live well, then no one will. If anything happens to me, I won't count on you to avenge me. I gave 50,000 taels of silver to the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce. If anything happens to me, the people of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce will naturally avenge me." "I don't believe it." Muyang shook his head and smiled. Yaoji remained silent. Muyang hugged her waist from behind and whispered, "Yaoji, you can live here from now on. Don't worry, from now on Marquis Muyang's men will never come again. No one will disturb us. Let's live a good life." More than a year ago when Muyang hugged her like this, she still felt warm and tender. but now she felt as if a cold and wet snake had wrapped itself around her. From the outside to the inside, the coldness seeped into his heart. Sure enough, no one disturbed them for 2 whole months. In these 2 months, Yaoji didn't resist Mu Yang, nor did she make a fuss about leaving. Gradually, Mu Yang seemed to be relieved and he came less often than before. After all, Mu Yang was a young and promising man. It was impossible for him to spend all his time on a woman. When Yaoji knew that Mu Yang wouldn't come for some time because of Mo Jingqi's order, she knew her chance had come. The servants in the courtyard didn't respect Yaoji. Seeing that she didn't intend to run away, they gradually relaxed their vigilance. Finally, Yaoji took the child and escaped from the courtyard one night when the lanterns were lit. After escaping from the courtyard, Yaoji only took some cheap but valuable jewelry. And she immediately exchanged these jewelry for silver notes. She didn't know when Mu Yang found out that she was missing, but no one chased after her for a few days before she escaped. Yaoji ran day and night all the way to the west, but unfortunately she was still caught by the people of Marquis Muyang's mansion 10 days later. It wasn't easy for a lone woman to run around with a child. On the 15th day, Yaoji finally saw the people who chased after her. But they were different from the people who looked for her everywhere 2 days ago. These people wanted to kill her. Just when Yaoji was almost desperate, several carriages appeared at the edge of the woods. Without thinking too much, Yaoji ran towards the carriages with the child in her arms. While running, she shouted, "Help!" In the front, a man in gray was stunned for a moment and then he quickly jumped up. The people who chased after her were not professional assassins, nor were they masters. Naturally, they were easily killed. Yaoji sat on the ground with the child in her arms. For a moment she didn't come to her senses. Was she safe? "Miss Yaoji, are you all right?" A deep male voice sounded in front of her. Yaoji looked up in a daze. A tall man with a calm expression stood in front of her. Yaoji was stunned, saying, "You are Commander Qin?" "Qin Feng." Qin Feng said lightly. He was ordered to go to the capital of Chu to find the princess's 2 wet nurses and 2 maids. But he didn't expect to meet Yaoji, who was being chased. Frowning, Qin Feng asked, "Who is chasing after you?" Yaoji said with waning interest, "Probably people from the house of Marquis Muyang." She had just escaped from danger. These days of hiding and hurrying on the road had already exhausted her both mentally and physically. Now that she suddenly relaxed, she didn't have the mood to care about these things. Qin Feng looked down at the child in her arms. He didn't cry when Yaoji was running with him. "This is your child?" Yaoji nodded and smiled, saying, "Yes, this is my son. Shin Jin Gon." Qin Feng raised his eyebrows. He didn't ask why the child's surname wasn't Mu. He looked down at Yaoji and said, "Miss, what are your plans?" Yaoji said embarrassedly, "I plan to go west." Qin Feng thought for a moment and said, "We are going back to Glass City. Miss, you can come with us." Yaoji was delighted. She originally planned to go to the Prince Ding mansion. She didn't have to go to Glass City. But people from the house of Marquis Muyang would be more restrained after entering Feihong Pass. But the journey to Glass City was long. It would be best if she could travel with them. Thinking of this, Yaoji didn't refuse. She nodded and said, "Then thank you, Commander Qin." Qin Feng shook his head silently. He looked at Yaoji's sallow and emaciated appearance and didn't say anything more. He only said, "It's nothing. No need to be so polite." Chapter 1133. Yaoji lived in Glass City. After careful consideration, she finally asked Princess Ding to find a good family for the child. When she was in Marquis Muyang's mansion, she would rather die than give up the child, because she knew that the child would not have a good life if left alone in Marquis Muyang's mansion. No matter how much Muyang loved the child, there would be times when he did not take good care of the child. One negligence was enough to kill the child. Now that she had settled down, Yaoji had more time to think about it. It was not good for the child to follow Muyang, but it was not necessarily a good thing to have a mother like her. Moreover, it was not difficult for her to raise a child alone, but it was not so easy to make a good relationship with a child and let a boy grow up happily. Boys would always need a father. Moreover, Yaoji always had a hunch that the matter of Marquis Muyang's mansion was not over yet. Princess Ding did find a good family for the child, a couple over 40 without children. They came from a scholarly family. Although they were not rich, they had some assets. Yaoji secretly went to see them several times. The couple really treated the child as their own. Seeing her son growing up in a healthy and comfortable family, Yaoji smiled faintly. But in her heart she was really happy and calm. 3 months later, Yaoji opened a restaurant in the city. The money to open the restaurant was borrowed from Princess Ding. In the end, Princess Ding only gave her half of the money, and the remaining half was the shares of Prince Ding Mansion. Yaoji had no objection to this. Not to mention that she could not repay the kindness of Prince Ding Mansion in this life. She opened a restaurant in the territory of Prince Ding Mansion. What could be more stable than the Prince Ding Mansion itself? Yaoji had several years of experience in running Qingqing Lane. Although opening a restaurant was completely different from opening a musical house, at least it proved that Yaoji could handle the situation in dealing with people and receiving guests. As expected, it did not take long for the restaurant to gain a foothold in the city. Gradually, Yaoji did not need to show up in public and really retired behind the scenes. Yaoji did not know how she became familiar with Qin Feng. He only remembered that when the restaurant had just opened, Qin Feng often came back to support it. He didn't do anything. He just ordered a pot of wine and 2 side dishes. Sometimes he would sit there for 2 to 4 hours. Because of his presence, even though she was an outsider who had just opened a new restaurant, many of the city's hedonistic sons and their peers did not dare to cause trouble in the restaurant. After all, everyone in Riyang City knew that Qin Feng was Princess Ding's personal guard. After a long time, the two of them would naturally chat for a while, and naturally became more familiar with each other. By the time Yaoji realized what was going on, Qin Feng threw the purple jade hairpin into her hand with a cold expression, pretending to be indifferent but not allowing her to refuse. She immediately panicked. Then, almost without hesitation, she asked Princess Ding to go to the capital to assist Leng Haoyu. After a long time, when she had calmed down, she suddenly realized that at that time, she actually felt that facing Qin Feng was even more difficult than facing Mu Yang again, and that she might even end up fighting with him. That was why she chose to escape to the capital. Princess Ding did not agree to her request at that time, and Qin Feng came to her door that night. Yaoji was not surprised by Qin Feng's arrival. With Qin Feng's status in the Prince Ding Mansion and Princess Ding's trust in him, it was impossible for him not to know this kind of thing. If it's because of me that makes you embarrassed, then I can take it back. Looking at the woman in light purple in front of him, Qin Feng said in a deep voice. His calm eyes fell on the purple in Yaoji's hair bun. Yaoji was stunned and shook her head lightly. No, not all. She was not lying, at least in her heart at that moment. Yaoji was very clear that Prince Ding and Princess Ding were different. Princess Ding herself might not agree with her going to the capital, but Prince Ding must let her go. In the past few years she had several contacts with Prince Ding. As a woman she could only envy Prince Ding's feelings for the princess. But Prince Ding's means to those who had hurt Princess Ding or intended to hurt her were chilling. Yaoji also knew that when Princess Ding almost fell off the cliff and died, the person who led the army at that time was Marquis Muyang. Every time she saw Prince Ding's thoughtful look, Yaoji knew that Prince Ding did not forget this matter. Although Prince Ding did not say it himself, Yaoji had already understood what he meant. If she wanted to live peacefully and leisurely, she must deal with Marquis Muyang's mansion by herself. She could not deal with it more neatly than others, but she and her child could obviously make Marquis Muyang's mansion and Muyang suffer more. Yaoji was not a kind person. She did not feel unwilling or angry about this, just like she would not feel guilty or sad even if Marquis Muyang's mansion was destroyed because of her. This world was a survival of the fittest. When she was no match for young Madame Mu, she could only lie in the courtyard with her child and wait for Muyang to save her or wait for death. When Princess Ding did not have enough troops, she could only gamble with her life by jumping off the cliff. Therefore, when Marquis Muyang's mansion provoked Prince Ding and was unable to fight back, only destruction awaited them. She wanted to give her child a peaceful life. What did other people's lives have to do with her? Qin Feng was silent and did not persuade her anymore. He just said, "Come back alive. Don't forget, you have a child. We'll wait for you." Seeing that Yaoji wanted to say something, Qin Feng calmly added, "I will wait for you to come back before making a decision." Yaoji shook her head and gritted her teeth. "I know you are very good to me. I don't know how many years I will be gone. You are not young anymore, you should have." Qin Feng looked out of the window and said lightly, "It's your business how to decide. It's my business whether to wait or not. The princess ordered me to escort you to the capital. You should rest early. We will leave tomorrow morning. After that, Qin Feng did not give Yaoji a chance to refuse. He turned and walked out of the door. Looking at the straight back of the person who had walked out of the door, Yaoji smiled bitterly in her heart. Yaoji, you really should have just refused him directly. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed. Emperor Chu Mo Jingqi, who had spent his life trying to suppress the Prince Ding mansion, had passed away. The northern tribes and the northern territory invaded. The Dechu state, which had lost the Prince Ding mansion, was powerless to resist and went south to Jiangnan. The Prince Ding mansion protected the country, and the southern Chu regent Mo Jingli joined forces with the northern tribes and Shilin to deal with the Prince Ding mansion. And the Marquis Muyang's mansion was also finished. When she saw Muyang reluctantly close his eyes in front of her, Yaoji did not feel any joy or satisfaction from revenge. She did not even feel any sorrow. Her heart was only silent and desolate. The war was still going on. Yaoji returned to Glass City with a desolate state of mind and her adopted son, Qin Lai, who had accompanied her for several years. She still lived the same peaceful life as before. She only occasionally secretly went to see her son, who had already entered a private school. Only then did she feel a faint sense of comfort. Although she did not pay attention to worldly affairs, Yaoji still heard about the war on the front line from time to time. Every day Yaoji sat at the table in the wing room that Qin Feng usually sat at in the restaurant. She listened to the people who walked by and talked loudly. Chapter 1134. Even though the Mahist army went through many twists and turns, they still defeated all the enemies in the end and returned victorious. Mother, let's go. Qin Lai rushed in, grabbed Yaoji and was about to rush out. Yaoji hurriedly pulled him back and said helplessly, "What's the rush?" Qin Lai rolled his eyes and said, "Father is back, let's go welcome him." Originally, Qin Lai had always called her godmother and Qin Feng godfather. But after returning to Glass City, Yaoji suddenly found that Qin Lai, who was usually calm, had become much more lively. And the way he called her and Qin Feng had become father and mother, which would cause people to misunderstand. But he still didn't change. Yaoji pulled his hand away and sighed softly. Today is the day of the Mahist army's victorious return. There are so many people, why should we go? Qin Lai pouted unhappily and said, "What do you mean by joining in? What's wrong with going to welcome father's victorious return? Father will be very happy when he sees us." Yaoji shook her head and said, "You go, I won't go. Just say congratulations to Qin Commander for me." Qin Lai's little face instantly drooped. It seemed that his mother still wasn't willing to accept his father. Qin Lai felt that his godfather was the most devoted man in the world. Who in the world could chase a girl for 7 or 8 years? Why didn't his mother like him? Then he thought about the things that his mother often secretly took out to look at in the Chu capital in Jiangnan. It didn't seem like she didn't like them. Could it be that his mother had some concerns? "Since you're not going, I won't go either." Qin Lai sat dejectedly at the table across from Yaoji, looking at her with eager eyes. Yaoji helplessly raised her hand and patted his head, saying, "What are you doing, you little brat? It's not like you don't know my identity. If I run out, won't I just embarrass Commander Qin? And you, if you dare to shout outside in the future, do you believe that I'll beat you?" "I don't believe," Qin Lai said with a smile. "Godfather said that I might be his only son in his life. I still have to take care of him when he's old, of course I have to call him father. And you, godmother, it feels so distant. Right, mother?" Yaoji felt powerless. She waved her hand and said, "Anyway, go and welcome your adoptive father. I'm not feeling well, so I won't be going." "Not feeling well?" Qin Lai looked at her in confusion. "Yes. Go quickly. I really can't go." Qin Lai nodded seriously and said, "I understand. Mother, I'll be leaving first." Outside the door, Qin Lai looked back at Yaoji, who was sitting at the table in a daze, and said to himself, "Does she mean that she wants father to visit her in person?" In the courtyard behind the restaurant, Yaoji was sitting alone under a tree playing the zither. The sound of the zither, which was supposed to be beautiful and smooth, was intermittent and unclear. The mind of the person under the tree was obviously not on the strings of the zither. She was absent-minded as she plucked the strings. A series of steady footsteps came from the gate of the courtyard. Yaoji was stunned and looked back, only to see Qin Feng in black standing not far away and looking at her calmly. For some reason Yaoji felt a little guilty. Qin Feng walked up and looked down at her. After a long time he asked, "Why don't you come out of the city?" Yaoji stood up in a panic and said, I have to look after the restaurant." In fact, almost all the people in the city went out to welcome the returning Maoist army. Even though Yaoji's restaurant was one of the best in Glass City, there was no business this morning. "You're lying." Qin Feng stared at her and said indifferently. He was the leader of Qilin. If he couldn't even tell if someone was lying or not, he wouldn't be able to survive. Yaoji was a little upset. She clenched her teeth and said in a low voice, "Fine, I'll say. I don't think we're suitable. Let's meet less in the future. I'll give it back to you." Yaoji reached out to Qin Feng, holding the purple jade hairpin in her hand. Qin Feng didn't get angry. Even his expression didn't change in the slightest. He said indifferently, "It's too late." Yaoji was surprised. "What's too late?" Qin Feng said, "A few years ago before you went to the capital you didn't give it back to me. I'll take it as a yes." Miss Yaoji had always been good at dancing. Her dance in Qinqing Lane was enough to topple a city and stun the capital. Even in Jiangnan she could still play with officials and noblewomen in southern Chu and the entire Marquis Muyang's mansion. But in front of this silent and calm man, she couldn't even say a word clearly. After a while she clenched her teeth and said, "I said it's impossible between us. What's your status and what's my status? If you really marry me you'll only be laughed at by the world." "Who dares to laugh at me?" Qin Feng didn't care. There weren't many people in the world who dared to laugh at him. He was the leader of the most elite Qilin in the Prince Ding mansion and Princess Ding's most trusted confidant. Now that the world had just settled down, everyone knew that he must have a promising future. Gossip is a fearful thing. You should go. These years if it's my fault. Yaoji lowered her head and said. She didn't know when she had placed this man in her heart. Perhaps it was when he silently accompanied her day after day in the restaurant back then. Perhaps it was when he calmly comforted her in Jiangnan. Perhaps it was when he didn't want to make things difficult for her and was willing to let her hate him to personally get rid of Muyang for him. Perhaps it was now. Even though she was moved by his feelings, she didn't want to hinder his future and make him a laughingstock. Qin Feng nodded and said, "It's good that you know you're wrong. If you know you're wrong you should change. Come with me." Qin Feng pulled Yaoji out of the courtyard. Yaoji's strength was naturally no match for Qin Feng's, even though Qin Feng didn't use too much strength. Where are we going?" "Prince Ding Mansion. I'm asking the prince and princess to grant a marriage," Qin Feng replied indifferently. "In the Prince Ding Mansion." Yili calmly looked at the two people in front of her and asked, "Have you thought it through?" "No," Yaoji said anxiously. She didn't expect that Qin Feng would really pull her to Princess Ding. Before she could finish speaking she was interrupted by Qin Feng, replying to Wang Fei, "This subordinate has thought it through. Please grant my wish." People were distant from each other. Compared with Yaoji, Yili obviously cared more about Qin Feng's opinion. She just smiled and said, "But I think Yaoji didn't agree. Qin Feng, do you know what the punishment is for forcing a woman from a good family?" "The heaviest punishment is 100 and banishment for 3,000 miles. Yili smiled and nodded with satisfaction. "You're my confidant, so you don't have to be banished. But if a prince breaks the law he'll be punished with 300 beatings. Are you lucky?" "Yes, please grant my wish, princess." Yili was immediately amused. She looked at Qin Feng with a smile and said, "Do you think I'll marry Yaoji to you if you can endure 300 beatings?" Mo Xiaoyao, who had been watching the show, suddenly said, "Li, if Qin Feng can really endure 300 beatings, it means he's not destined to die. You can give him face. Yaoji, don't worry. After all, you're the hero of the Prince Ding Mansion. I won't push you into the fire pit. After Qin Feng suffers 300 beatings, I promise he won't be able to get up for the rest of his life. In the future, you can do whatever you want, right?" Yaoji couldn't come to her senses. She really didn't understand what was going on. Why did she suddenly have to beat Qin Feng? Seeing that Princess Ding was about to call someone to drag Qin Feng out for punishment, Yaoji hurriedly cried, "No. No, princess, Qin Feng didn't force Yaoji." Yili raised her eyebrows. "Oh? Then who didn't you just say what?" Yaoji was speechless. She looked at Prince Ding, who was in high spirits. It seemed that as long as she said one wrong word he would immediately pull Qin Feng and beat him severely. Yaoji said carefully, I mean you don't have to bother me with this kind of thing. Yili smiled faintly, what kind of trouble is this? You don't have a family and Qin Feng is also alone. Naturally, your marriage will be arranged by the Prince Ding mansion. Qin Feng, go back and tell Director Mo, just arrange it according to the standard of a general. As the commander of Qi Lin, Qin Feng's position was equal to that of a general who led an army. In addition, Yaoji is the hero of the Prince Ding mansion and the manager of the intelligence in the south. She has worked hard these years. Let's arrange the dowry according to the rank of a county princess. The wedding will be held in the Prince Ding mansion in August this year. What do you think? Thank you, princess. Everything will be decided by you. Qin Feng agreed without hesitation. When she came out of the Prince Ding mansion, Yaoji was still a little dizzy. She forgot to care that she and Qin Feng walking together in the daytime would cause gossip. Qin Feng looked at her with a smile and said, now that the marriage has been decided, you should just stay at home and wait to get married. Yaoji's expression was complicated. He was not young anymore. Women over 30 years old no longer dreamed of wearing a red wedding dress and getting married like ordinary women. But the man in front of her gave her everything she dreamed of. From his eyes, she could see that he really didn't care about the possible rumors and ridicule. If there was a man in the world who could take care of her like this, why would she refuse the happiness that was about to come to her? You don't want to run away from the marriage, do you? Qin Feng frowned. No, I don't. I'll wait for you. Yaoji calmed herself down and said in a deep voice. Qin Feng's expression softened and he said with a smile, okay, I'll take you back first. Qin Feng, do you know my name? Of course I do. The tall man held the woman's slender hand and while walking he said with a faint smile, isn't your surname Xin? Xin Yao. Yes, my name is Xin Yao. She was Xin Yao, no longer Yaoji. Qin Feng's Xin Yao. Chapter 1135. Beat him to death. Beat him to death. On a deserted street, a group of gorgeously dressed children were beating and kicking a thin and weak child in embroidered clothes. These children were the most cruel. They didn't understand the calculations and disputes of adults, but they used their own methods to directly and violently solve the problem. The child being beaten was also dressed in embroidered clothes, but his entire body was thin and weak like a lonely puppy. His small face was already faintly discernible of his future handsome and extraordinary appearance. Perhaps it was this appearance that caused him to be hated and bullied by children of the same age. As expected of the son of a vixen, born with such a disgusting appearance. An 11 or 12-year-old youth in embroidered clothes stood to the side, proudly scolding. The boy fiercely opened his eyes, fiercely glaring at the elder brother who was standing to the side and ordering people to beat him. Startled by his ferocious gaze, the youth unconsciously took a step back. When he finally reacted, he flew into a rage out of humiliation. Teach him a good lesson for this young master. Someone's coming. It was unknown who shouted, but the children who were still beating and kicking immediately scattered like birds and beasts. The youth in embroidered clothes unwillingly glanced at the child on the ground, then followed after them. The street suddenly quieted down, and the beaten child curled himself into a small ball, tightly hugging his knees and softly sobbing. Don't cry, they're gone. A soft and gentle voice filled with kindness sounded, and the boy couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. He raised his head and saw an extremely beautiful young girl in embroidered clothes standing in front of him at some unknown time. The young girl was only 12 or 13 years old, and even though he had seen many beautiful girls, the boy still felt that the elder sister in front of him was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She wore a light yellow robe with cloud patterns, and the sleeves and hem of her robe were embroidered with rose-red phoenix tail lace, and she also wore a light red phoenix tail embroidered scarf. A green gem hung by her slender neck, and her hair was casually tied up in a simple bun with a hibiscus hairpin, and there was also an unshaken hairpin. When she lowered her head to look at him, the light golden jade hanging from the buyao swayed gently, and the little child couldn't help but be stunned. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Seeing that he didn't speak, the young girl squatted down worriedly. No. The boy shook his head and whispered. Although those people beat him, they didn't really dare to beat him to death, so he didn't get hurt, but it was very painful. Otherwise he would have been beaten to death over the years. It's good that you're not injured. I'll get someone to send you back. Who are those people? Why did they hit you? The girl looked at the boy's dusty face and took out a handkerchief to carefully wipe him clean. Only then did she realize that the boy was actually very good-looking. It's none of your business. The boy was stunned. He raised his hand and slapped the girl's hand away. Seeing the girl's startled expression, the boy bit his lips in annoyance. However, he stubbornly refused to speak and turned his head away. The girl was also a descendant of a prestigious family. Although she was young, she had seen many things. Looking at the child's appearance, he could roughly guess what was going on. This child was unwilling to go home. He was afraid that she had been wronged at home. Those people just now could be this child's family. All right, let's not go home yet. What's your name? The girl pulled the boy up and asked with a smile. Feng Jiao. The boy hesitated, but in the end he didn't ask. The girl's name couldn't be casually asked. Although Feng Jiao was a concubine's son, he had learned everything he needed to learn. Feng Jiao? You're a child of the capital's Feng family? You can just call me Big Sister Hua. The girl smiled. The noble ladies in the capital all had their own circles. When a large group of girls gathered together, they naturally couldn't help but gossip. The Feng family was considered a famous family in the capital. The girl naturally heard of the Feng family's affairs. You won't look down on me? Feng Jiao stared at the girl in front of him and asked in confusion. The girl smiled sweetly and said in confusion, Look down on you? Why? You're so young, only 7 or 8 years old. Why would I look down on you? I'm a concubine's son. Feng Jiao clenched his teeth. After hesitating, he fiercely added, I'm not young. I'm already 9 years old. 9 years old? You don't look like it. The girl said, Whether you're a concubine's son or not isn't something you can choose. In the future, if you work hard, others won't look down on you. However, if you grow up and learn from those hedonistic sons of rich parents, I will naturally look down on you. I'll be 9 years old soon, Feng Jiao said. Don't tell me I don't want to learn well? It was clearly Auntie who said a concubine's son didn't need to learn so much. The girl smiled as she looked at the indignant child in front of her. Suddenly, she pursed her lips and smiled. If you really want to improve yourself, I'll take you to a good place to play. Feng Jiao looked suspiciously at the girl in front of him. The girl comforted him by patting his head and smiling. Don't be afraid. Big Sister isn't a bad person. When the soft jade hand touched his dusty head, Feng Jiao felt in his heart that even if this sister was a bad person, he was willing to go with her. It was better than going home to face his auntie and 2 older brothers. Holding Feng Jiao's hand, they walked to the intersection. There was a carriage parked at the intersection. In front of the carriage stood several bodyguard-like men, a middle-aged woman and several servant girls. Seeing the 2 of them, the middle-aged woman hurriedly greeted them with a frown and a hint of anger. She had just seen a group of children ganging up on a child. Originally, they had planned to scare them away. Who would have thought that the miss would insist on taking a look at the boy and even bring him back? Looking at the dirty boy in front of her, the middle-aged woman's brows immediately furrowed. Wet nurse. The girl called out in a low voice. Patting Feng Jiao's hand comfortingly, she smiled at the wet nurse and said, This child is very obedient. Take him to be a companion for Ah Yao. I am my miss. The wet nurse immediately cried out, Miss, we don't even know where this boy came from. How can he be a companion for that young master? Something happens. Their Hua family was considered to be of noble status in the capital, but compared to the Prince Ding mansion it was nothing. Not just anyone had the qualifications to be a playmate for the young master of the Prince Ding mansion. It's fine. Piao is a good child. The girl smiled and said, Get in the carriage. This has the same name as the second young master? The wet nurse was stunned and carefully sized up Feng Jiao. Only then did she realize that this child was very good-looking. It was just that he was a bit thin. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't lose to the second young master of the Prince Ding mansion. Fine, but this child has to be obedient. Don't anger the nobles and implicate our miss. The wet nurse nodded and instructed. She wasn't a cold-hearted person. This child was so young and was being ganged up on by a group of children. It was quite pitiful. However, as the eldest Mrs. Wet Nurse, she naturally had to pay attention to everything. Chapter 1136. On this day for the first time Feng Jiao met a person who would have a great impact on his future life. It was the second son of King Ding's mansion, Immerse. As the illegitimate son of a merchant family, to be able to meet the legitimate son of the high and mighty Prince Ding of Great Chu, it could be said to be a matter of 3 lifetimes of fortune. But, for Feng Jiao, what he thought at that time was, he really wanted to kick him to death. As soon as he entered the magnificent gate of King Ding's mansion, a strong wind came to his face. Feng Jiao was stunned. After all, he was only a child less than 9 years old. Even if he found the hidden weapon, he couldn't avoid it. However, he didn't think that the hidden weapon flying towards his face was just an illusion. A stone flew past his scalp, but he only felt something flying over his head. There wasn't even a trace of pain. "Sister Yunqi, why are you here?" On a rockery in front, an 8 or 9-year-old boy in white sat on it swaggeringly. He looked at the well-dressed girl with a smile and didn't even look at Feng Jiao. But Feng Jiao didn't care. He just noticed one thing. So, her name was Yunqi? Hua Yunqi. Yao, are you being naughty again? I'll complain to first young master and let him punish you. Hua Yunqi laughed crisply. The child on the rockery somersaulted in the air and landed steadily in front of them. A child less than 10 years old, but his lightness skill was not inferior to the first-class masters in Jianghu. Mo Shuyao curled his lips and said, "Sister Hua, you always use my elder brother to suppress me." But second young master Mo was not afraid of anything, but he obeyed his elder brother who raised him since he was a child. Hua Yunqi covered her mouth and snickered. Who asked him to be afraid of Prince Ding in the air? "Sister Hua, are you here for me?" Mo Shuyao said with a smile. Hua Yunqi nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, I'm going out of the city to pray for blessings and visit Great Elder Princess. Last time Great Elder Princess nagged me to take you there next time. Pack up and let's go." Mo Shuyao let out an anguished cry as he stared at Hua Yunqi. Hua Yunqi raised an eyebrow and smiled, ignoring his pitiful appearance. Mo Shuyao could only grumble in his heart. Every time Great Elder Princess saw him, she liked to pinch and rub him. This young master isn't a doe. Only then did second young master Mo's gaze fall upon the gloomy Feng Jiao standing to the side. He asked, "Who is this brat? Ah? He's so silly." Hua Yunqi glared at him helplessly, then said, "His name is Feng Jiao. He's a good kid. I'll tell the crown prince to let him learn martial arts with you in the future. You're about the same age, so you'll have a companion." Second young master Mo rolled his eyes. He looks so silly, can he keep up with his studies? Hearing someone's arrogant tone, Feng Jiao silently lowered his head and stared at his fist. Even when he was bullied by his 2 half-brothers every day these years, he didn't feel that his fist was so strong. Hey, silly boy, you don't want to beat me, do you? Even 10 of you can't beat one of me, do you know? Second young master Mo couldn't be the most arrogant, so he would only be more arrogant. "Mo Xiaoyao!" Hua Yunqi shouted angrily. Seeing Hua Yunqi's raised hand, second young master Mo immediately fled, and didn't forget to complain. "Sister Hua, I'm your younger brother. Who on earth is this brat? Why are you so nice to him?" Feng Jiao snorted coldly, raised his small face and turned to go out. Hua Yunqi was stunned, hurriedly pulled him and said, "Where are you going?" Feng Jiao said coldly, "You don't need to beg him. I don't want to learn martial arts with him. Isn't he just the second young master of the Prince Ding mansion? I don't want to." Hua Yunqi was both angry and amused. She grabbed the child who was about to leave with one hand, and glared at Mo Xiaoyao who was making a face at the side. She laughed and said, "Ah Yao just likes to mess around, he doesn't have any bad intentions." Feng Jiao snorted disdainfully. They had just met and he was already hitting people with stones and his eyes were growing on top of his head. How could he be a good person? "I'm going back. Thank you for saving me today." Feng Jiao tried his best to express his thanks like an adult, but his current sorry state was really lacking in persuasion. Seeing that he was about to leave, Mo Xiaoyao didn't want to. He blocked his path with a smile and asked, "What are you going back for? To continue getting beaten?" Although he was young, he was extremely intelligent. How could he not know why Feng Jiao was in such a mess? And why did Hua Yunqi bring him to the Prince Ding mansion? "Who cares what you do?" Feng Jiao's face immediately turned red with anger, as if his embarrassment had been seen through. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand and pulled on his cheek. "All right, for Sister Hua's sake, in the future, you can practice martial arts with this young master." "Who wants to practice with you?" Seeing that Feng Jiao was about to refuse, Emo Xiuyao quickly moved in front of him and said in a low voice, "This young master guarantees that you'll only need 3 days to beat those people who bullied you to the ground." Feng Jiao was silent. It wasn't that he had a good impression of this annoying person in front of him, but that beating those people who bullied him to the ground was really a very tempting suggestion. "What are your conditions?" Feng Jiao asked. In this world there was no such thing as a free lunch. Perhaps, except for her? Conditions. Emo Xiuyao didn't seem to expect that he would say such a thing. After thinking for a while, he touched his chin and pretended to be mature. "From now on, if I tell you to go east, you can't go west. If I tell you to jump into rivers, you can't climb mountains. If I tell you to chase cats, you can't play with dogs. In short, you'll listen to everything I say." Emo Xiuyao. "Go to hell." Young Master Feng San spat out coldly. Listen to everything he said? If he told him to die, he would do it. Did he think he was a fool? "I hate gigolos like you the most. Since you came, Sister Hua doesn't love me anymore." Second young Master Mo was a little hurt. Feng Jiao rolled his eyes. "Do you think you're so evil? Xiao, get along well with Xiao." "I won't visit Great Elder Princess today," Hua Yunqi said with a smile. Emo Xiuyao's little face lit up. He raised his hand and patted Feng Jiao's shoulder with a smile. "The person Sister Hua brings is my good friend and brother. Sister Hua, don't worry. We'll get along well. I'll take good care of Brother Xiao. He's the same age as you," Hua Yunqi emphasized helplessly. "I don't care. Feng Jiao, right? Come, this young master will take you to the study for class. The teacher will definitely go crazy." Emo Xiuyao waved his hand at Hua Yunqi, then grabbed Feng Jiao's collar and ran off. Being dragged along, Feng Jiao looked back absent-mindedly and saw the beautiful girl still standing behind him and looking at them with a smile. The faint sunlight shone on her as if she had a halo of 7 colors. Bang! Feng Jiao, who was absent-minded, tripped and fell to the ground, prostrating himself on the ground. Feng Jiao's eyebrows twitched. "Emo Xiuyao, damn you." Chapter 1137. In the 3rd month of the Chu capital, hundreds of flowers were blooming. The spring scenery was intoxicating. On the outskirts of the capital, by the shore of Beauty Lake, groups of 2 or 3 young ladies were strolling along the grassy shore, either admiring the flowers or joking around. This made Beauty Lake, which had been quiet for an entire winter, even brighter and more moving. 3 fast horses were galloping from the distance. The one at the front was a black steed. There was not a single strand of hair on its body. At a glance, it was a rare steed. What caught everyone's attention was the youth on the horse. He was dressed in white, had black hair, and was handsome. His handsome face was full of confidence and arrogance. Even though the 2 people behind him were also very outstanding, everyone's eyes involuntarily fell on the white-clothed young man. The young ladies couldn't help but cover their faces in embarrassment, but some couldn't help but want to peek. The young masters only took one look and felt like their eyes were about to be burned by this youth's radiance. "Ayao, can you not be so arrogant? Emo Jingli's gaze is about to throw knives at you." The 3 steeds stopped by the peach forest not far from the lake. Feng Jiao, dressed in red brocade, fell off the back of the horse and glanced at Emo Xiuyao. Although he was not yet 13, he had been practicing martial arts with Emo Xiuyao for the past few years. His body had quickly grown. At first he looked like he was 7 or 8 years old. Now he was about the same height as Emo Xiuyao. The second young master of the Prince Ding mansion, Emo Xiuyao, was 13 years old and had just returned from a victorious battle at the border. He was in high spirits. The tempering on the battlefield made him sharper than other youths of his age. Emo Xiuyao raised his brows and said, "When did he not throw knives at me when he saw me?" Glancing at the person not far away who was gnashing his teeth and glaring at them, Emo Xiuyao said carelessly, "Speaking of which, what is it this time?" Feng Jiao rolled his eyes. "Second young Master Mo, have you forgotten that the day before you left, you accidentally kicked someone into the Golden Water River?" There's such a thing?" Emo Xiuyao was at a loss. This young master has been away for half a year, and he's holding a grudge for so long over such a small matter? Do you have too much time on your hands? Being thrown into the river was not a big deal. Young Master Feng San thought to himself. But the bad thing was that after second young Master Emo kicked him down, he didn't even think of pulling him up to apologize. Instead, when he finally managed to get up, second young master Emo brushed past him and stepped on him again. That day, there was not a single person who did not shed tears for His Highness King Li. The water of the Golden Water River did not taste good, but His Highness Prince Li drank his fill. I heard that he was bedridden for more than half a month after he returned. By the time he got up and went to the palace to complain, Emo Shuyao had already left with the army. He was the one who attacked me first, okay? Second young master Emo clearly remembered what he had done. He rubbed his nose and said, moreover at that time didn't eldest brother send someone to ask me to return immediately, so, you were in a hurry so you stepped on his head? Feng Jiao glanced at a certain person who was glaring at them from not far away. To provoke a plague like Emo Shuyao, he wondered what kind of immortal Emo Jingli had offended in his past life. The scenery of the Chu capital is really not bad. The white-clothed youth who had been silently listening to their conversation praised with a smile. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, of course. Although the capital is not as hazy as Jiangnan's little bridge over flowing water, it still has its own flavor. Han Mingyue, what do you think? Are you planning to stay in the capital for a long time? The white-clothed youth shook his head and said, I can't stay for a long time. Mingxi is still in Jiangnan, so I'm worried. However, I will probably come to the capital often in the future. Feng Jiao looked at the white-clothed youth and said happily, that's good. I've heard that Mingyue is extremely intelligent. In the future I'll leave this fellow to you. When he said this, Feng Jiao seemed to be gnashing his teeth. The first time they met, Emo Shuyao had thought he was stupid. But before he met Emo Shuyao, Feng Jiao had never thought of himself as stupid. If he was stupid, he wouldn't have been as knowledgeable as other children his age, even though his aunt wouldn't allow him to attend school. But ever since he met Emo Shuyao, Feng Jiao seriously considered whether or not he was really stupid. For the same book he needed 10 days to memorize, but Emo Shuyao only needed 1 day to finish writing. For the same sword style he needed 3 days to learn, but Emo Shuyao only needed to read it once. In the end, even the teacher who taught them sympathized with young Master Feng San, who couldn't keep up at all and gave him a special lesson. But Han Mingyue was different. Although Han Mingyue had lived in Jiangnan for a long time, she was only 14 years old. Young Master Mingyue, on the other hand, was already famous throughout Jiangnan. He and Emo Shuyao could be said to have gotten to know each other through an exchange of blows. In the end, they got to know each other because they admired each other's abilities. Feng Jiao felt that his life would be much better with such a monstrous genius by his side. Han Mingyue smiled and shook her head, I'm not a genius. If we're talking about geniuses, who can compare to young Master Su of the Su family? The young master of the Su family, Su Qingchen, was a few years younger than them, but he was already famous throughout the world. All the scholars who had seen him were full of praise and called him a peerless genius. Emo Shuyao casually tied the horse to a tree and walked into the peach forest. Su Qingchen studies literature. He's not on the same path as us. Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion and the Su family couldn't get too close. Otherwise it wouldn't be good for anyone. In the peach forest, the sound of zither music could be heard from a distance. There were also many young girls singing and laughing. At this time, it was the time for scholars and beautiful girls to go out for a walk. Sister Hua. On an empty patch of grass in the peach forest, a group of young girls dressed in luxurious clothes sat on the ground. Some were playing zither while others were chatting and laughing. Sitting in the center was a young girl dressed in purple. She was the daughter of the Duke of Hua Yunxi. Seeing the three of them, the young girls couldn't help but blush. They hurriedly stood up and greeted them. The second young master of the Prince Ding mansion was of noble status. He was handsome and, more importantly, he was unmarried. He was the dream man of many young girls. Hua Yunxi stood up and looked at Emo Shuyao with a smile. You've grown a lot taller after going out. I've long heard from grandfather that you won a battle. You're indeed worthy of being a descendant of Prince Ding's residence. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. It's just a small fight. Hua Yunxi smiled faintly and said, Xiao, I haven't seen you in a long time. What have you been busy with recently? Feng Jiao looked at Hua Yunxi and forced a smile. It's nothing. I've been locked up at home by the old man. These years, young Master Feng San and the second young master of the Prince Ding mansion were in cahoots. No one is influenced by their environment. At least half of the bad things that Emo Shuyao did were done by young Master Feng San. Emo Shuyao dealt with Prince Li and ran away. Feng Jiao was too young to run away. His father, old Master Feng, gave him a good beating and sent him home for confinement. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows in confusion and asked, "What happened in the capital when I wasn't here?" After being brothers for a few years, Mo Xiuyao understood Feng Jiao well enough. If he had only been beaten up by his father and locked up, then Feng Jiao wouldn't have reacted this way. To put it bluntly, Feng Jiao was used to being taught a lesson by his father. Ever since young Master Feng San's martial prowess swept through the entire Feng clan, the only one left in the Feng clan who could teach him a lesson was his father. Chapter 1138. Hua Yunqi smiled faintly. "It's nothing major." A young girl by Hua Yunqi's side blushed. She covered her mouth and smiled. "The emperor has decreed a marriage between Sister Hua and His Highness Prince of Qi. The wedding will be held at the beginning of next month. When the time comes, Sister Hua will be a good princess consort of Qi." Her words carried a hint of envy. Ever since the prince regent passed away, the emperor's health had not been very good. No one could say for sure how long he would last. Most people knew that Prince of Qi was one of the princes most likely to ascend to the throne. If that was true, then Hua Yunqi would become the mother of the nation. Is that true? Mo Xiuyao was somewhat surprised. He had brought Han Mingyue out of the city as soon as he returned. He had no time to find out what had happened in the capital over the past half-year. He glanced worriedly at Feng Jiao. As expected, he saw him lowering his head with a gloomy expression. In truth, Mo Xiuyao had not been optimistic about Feng Jiao's feelings for Hua Yunqi from the very beginning. It was not only because of the difference in status between the two of them. Feng Jiao was too young, not even 13 years old. No matter how great his future was, Hua Yunqi, who was already 16 years old, could not always wait for him to become successful and famous in her boudoir. More importantly, how could Hua Yunqi believe in the feelings of a child who wasn't even 13 years old? Now that the emperor had decreed a marriage, there was no need to say anything. For the sake of the Hua clan, Hua Yunqi could not possibly have any thoughts that she should not have. Hua Yunqi smiled faintly. "It is the emperor's grace." From her expression, it was clear that she did not have any joy or expectation for this marriage, nor did she have any feelings of rejection. In this world, all women lived like this. Love and affection, that was something that only existed in novels. Mo Xiuyao smiled. "Then Xiuyao congratulates Sister Hua." Hua Yunqi smiled faintly. "You're not young anymore. I heard from grandfather that your eldest brother has already chosen a good girl for you. When you return, you'll be preparing for the engagement." Mo Xiuyao smiled casually. He really was young. He thought more about the hot-bloodedness of the battlefield and the free and easy life of the Jianghu. He was not as interested in beauties as other youths of his age. After bidding farewell to Hua Yunqi, the three of them walked out of the peach forest side by side. Han Mingyue glanced thoughtfully at Feng Jiao, whose gorgeous red clothes had become somewhat dull. She sighed slightly. He said softly, "Brother Feng, there are plenty of fish in the sea." Gongzi Mingyu was extremely intelligent. How could he not see Feng Jiao's feelings for Hua Yunqi? However, he still didn't know that love wasn't up to him at all. Moreover, he would not know that in the near future he would also encounter a demonic barrier for half of his life. He would fall into an even more miserable state than Feng Jiao. Mo Xiuyao sighed. He patted Feng Jiao on the shoulder and asked, "How is it? Do you want to go fight?" As a brother, Mo Xiuyao knew that Feng Jiao didn't need anyone to comfort him. Feng Jiao rolled his eyes. "Do you think I'm stupid? Even if he fought, he would still be the one getting beaten up. He was already very unlucky, he didn't want to be even more unlucky." As early as 3 months ago, when the emperor had just announced the marriage decree, Feng Jiao already knew. In other words, he already knew that it was impossible for him and Hua Yunqi to be together even before that. One was the legitimate daughter of a duke, the other was the illegitimate son of a merchant family. The difference between them was like heaven and earth, an insurmountable chasm. Feng Jiao wasn't naive. In fact, his childhood experience made him more clear-headed and mature than other youths of his age. Even he himself had never had much hope for this relationship of his. Needless to say, he was younger than her by 3 years. In her eyes, he was just a younger brother like Mo Xiuyao. Feng Jiao didn't know when his feelings had changed. Perhaps it was from the first time he had seen her, or perhaps it was when he had been framed by his aunt and older brother, lying half dead on the bed, or when she had secretly sent someone to take care of him, or perhaps it was just one day his heart had suddenly moved. Emo Xiuyao once said with a smile, "Love doesn't know where it starts, but it goes deep." Feng Jiao couldn't help but smile bitterly. Second young Master Emo was blessed by the heavens. Although he was his commander, he had never been troubled by love. He came and went as freely as the wind. It was impossible not to be envious. The night before Hua Yunqi and Emo Jingqi's wedding, it was raining heavily. Feng Jiao stood outside the walls of Hua Fu, lost in thought. The rain soaked his clothes and hair. Feng Jiao silently raised his eyes and looked at the dark night sky. He gritted his teeth, then jumped into the walls of Hua Fu. Feng Jiao had followed Emo Xiuyao to Hua Fu twice before, so he easily found his way to Hua Yunqi's door. It was already late at night. Hua Yunqi's room was quiet, but the light was still cold. Feng Jiao pressed his ear against the door and listened. After confirming that there was no one else inside besides Hua Yunqi, he knocked on the door. Hua Yunqi opened the door and was surprised to see Feng Jiao covered in water. "Jiao, why are you here so late? And you're covered in water? Can you not marry Prince Qi?" The youth didn't care about his sorry state at all. He stared fixedly at Hua Yunqi. Hua Yunqi was stunned. After a while she shook her head and said, "I can't." Seeing the young man biting the corner of his lips, his handsome face cold and pale, Hua Yunqi's heart couldn't help but ache. She didn't know if it was because of the night rain or something else. She didn't have any younger siblings, so she had always doted on this youth as if he were her own younger brother. Compared to the high-spirited and carefree second young Master Emo, she doted on this youth who wasn't valued by his father. He was clearly upset, but he stubbornly didn't care. "Silly child, even if I get married, I'm still your older sister. If you have time in the future, you can come visit me with Xiuyao at the Prince of Qifu." Feng Jiao stared fixedly at Hua Yunqi. At that moment Hua Yunqi almost thought that he was about to cry. After a long time Feng Jiao finally took out a walnut-sized luminous pearl. Under the night sky, the luminous pearl in Feng Jiao's hand glowed with a gentle purple light. It was obvious at a glance that it was priceless. "Jiao, what are you doing?" Feng Jiao stuffed the luminous pearl into Hua Yunqi's hand and said in a gruff voice, "This is a congratulatory gift for you. I won't be attending your wedding." After he finished speaking, he didn't wait for Hua Yunqi's reaction and turned to leave. Hua Yunqi held the luminous pearl in her hand and stared blankly at the youth's departing figure. Not far from Hua Yunqi, the gray-haired Duke of Hua stood under the eaves of his house. He watched as a black shadow dashed out of the courtyard and over the wall, sighing helplessly. Standing beside him was the white-robed second young master of the Prince Ding mansion, Emo Xiuyao. "Old Duke, thank you." Duke Hua sighed and said worriedly, "That child," Emo Xiuyao said, "he'll be fine. It's fine as long as old Duke doesn't blame him." Duke Hua smiled bitterly, "It's difficult to obey the imperial order. If it weren't for this, I'd rather Yunqi marry a more ordinary person." Emo Xiuyao smiled faintly, then bid farewell to Duke Hua and chased after Feng Jiao. Chapter 1139. Outside the Duke of Hua estate. In the pouring rain, a disheveled youth sat in a corner, allowing the rain to mercilessly wash over his weak body. His already pale face appeared even paler in the rain. "Get up." A handsome youth in white landed lightly not far from him, not forgetting to hold an oil paper umbrella in his hand so that he wouldn't be drenched by the rain. Compared to his clean appearance, the youth looked even more disheveled. Emo Xiuyao laughed coldly, walked over to Feng Jiao and squatted down. "What's the matter? You don't want to live anymore? Mind your own business." Feng Jiao impatiently closed his eyes. He was in an extremely bad mood, and even if the person in front of him was his good friend, he didn't want to bother. Emo Xiuyao laughed coldly, "Since you're half dead, why don't you just die? Maybe Sister Hua will shed a tear or two for you when she sees your pitiful state." "Emo Xiuyao, go die." Feng Jiao roared angrily and pounced towards his bad friend who was squatting in front of him. Right now he desperately needed to vent. Since someone was asking for a beating, why wouldn't he beat him up? The angry youth was momentarily dizzy, forgetting that the person in front of him wasn't someone he could beat up just because he wanted to. Sure enough, the moment he moved, Emo Xiuyao, who was squatting in front of him, stood up and retreated a few steps. Feng Jiao immediately pounced on empty air. People in a bad mood often got angry easily. Normally, Feng Jiao would have stopped after failing to hit him, but right now he seemed to be completely focused on Emo Xiao. He stood up and swung his fist towards Emo Xiao's face. Emo Xiao raised his eyebrows. He dodged again and Feng Jiao pounced again. The two of them began to fight in the rain. The only difference was that Feng Jiao was not only wet, but also covered in mud as if he had rolled in a quagmire. On the other hand, Emo Xiao's white robes fluttered in the wind. He held an umbrella in one hand. Even though it was raining heavily, not a single drop of rain could be seen on his robes. It was as if he wasn't fighting with someone but taking a leisurely stroll in the spring rain. When Feng Jiao finally ran out of strength, Emo Xiao smilingly lifted his leg and kicked him a few feet away. Looking at Feng Jiao, who was lying in the muddy water and too lazy to even crawl up, he said, "Tomorrow this young master is going to go on an expedition to the southern border. Do you want to come along? If you want to go, then get up and follow me. If you want to die, then continue to lie down." After saying that, he didn't care whether Feng Jiao could get up or not. He turned around and left. On the muddy ground, Feng Jiao crawled on the ground, letting the rain hit his pale and handsome face. After a long time he slowly crawled up. Looking back at a certain place in Hua Manor that was still lit in the night, he turned around and walked in the direction Emo Xiao had left. 17 years later. In a small manor outside Glass City, Hua Yunqi sat alone by the window, looking at the flowers outside in a daze. Although she was already over 30 years old, the years didn't leave too many traces on her beautiful face. On the contrary, the aura of an aristocratic family and the fact that she was once the mother of a nation made her more noble than ordinary women. "Mother." Emo Wio pushed open the door and came in with a smile. Hua Yunqi quickly got up and pulled her daughter, softly saying, "Why did you come out of the city? You're pregnant, so why don't you stay here?" Emo Wio acted spoiled and leaned against her mother, saying, "Wio is pregnant, but mother still isn't willing to stay in the city to take care of daughter, so daughter had to come out." "Nonsense." Hua Yunqi helplessly poked her daughter's forehead and said with a smile, "Your mother-in-law is taking good care of you. Why do you still need me? You're also a sensible child. Su family's first madam is a rare mother-in-law, so what nonsense are you talking about?" Emo Wio stuck out her tongue. Of course, she wasn't dissatisfied with her mother-in-law, she just wanted to make a fuss with her mother. Looking at her mother, Emo Wio's eyes turned and said, "That's right, mother, I just saw Uncle Feng-san outside, why didn't he come in?" Hearing this, Hua Yunqi was stunned and said, "He's not busy, he'll naturally leave in a while." Emo Wio smiled with some suspicion. These past few years she had seen Feng Jiao's every move. As a daughter, it would be a lie to say that she really wanted her mother to find her a stepfather. But Emo Wio also knew the hardships and grievances her mother had suffered these past few years, as well as Feng Jiao's infatuation. If Feng Jiao hadn't stubbornly taken her mother out of the palace, her mother would have died long ago. Feng Jiao had long passed the age of 30, but he still insisted on going against Feng Jihuai's wishes and refused to get married. He was even more concerned about her mother's well-being. To say something a little insatiable, even Su Qingbai wasn't so attentive to her. Her mother was only in her 30s now, her life was still very young. If possible, Emo Wio naturally hoped that her mother could live happily in the latter half of her life. "Mother, why don't you let Uncle Feng-san come in, we can have a good talk." Wio, looking at his appearance, "I'm afraid he won't leave easily." Emo Wio softly advised. Hua Yunqi sighed bitterly. How could she not understand Feng Jiao's feelings after all these years? But understanding was one thing, the reality was that he was one of the most trusted aides in the Prince Ding mansion, with a high position and boundless future. And she was the widow of the previous emperor. Even if she changed her name now, how could she really deceive the world? If they got together, it would not only ruin Feng Jiao's reputation, but also Emo Wio, the Su family, and even the Prince Ding mansion's reputation. How could Emo Wio not see Hua Yunqi's concerns, but she didn't know how to persuade her mother. Prince Ding and the princess consort didn't care about this, and neither did the Su family. But no matter how she persuaded her mother, she still couldn't let it go. Since mother doesn't want to see Uncle Feng-san, Wio will send him away. Hua Yunqi didn't comment. Emo Wio shook her head regretfully and turned to leave. Uncle Feng-san. Outside the door, a handsome man dressed in red was anxiously circling the courtyard. When he heard Emo Wio's voice, he turned around in surprise. but when he didn't see the figure he wanted to see, his eyes dimmed. She still doesn't want to see me? Feng Jiao asked in a low voice. Although he had long passed his prime, the red-clothed young master Feng San was still extraordinarily handsome. After experiencing the tempering of countless wars, he even had a bit of sharpness and calmness. The current young master Feng San was no longer the useless hedonistic son of the Chu capital back then. He had already achieved success and fame, but he still couldn't get what he wanted most. Ever since Mo Wuyo got married, Hua Yunqi moved out of Glass City and lived in a courtyard at the foot of a mountain not far from Lishan Academy. Since then she seemed to have retreated from the world and didn't leave the house. Recently she didn't even want to see him. Mo Wuyo shook her head apologetically. She looked at Feng Jiao with pity. She knew her mother's personality very well. Once she made up her mind, it was hard to change it. Chapter 1140. Feng Jiao's smile was a little bitter. Mo Wuyu looked at his gloomy expression and couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Uncle Feng, why don't you go back first? Maybe after 2 days mother's mood will be better. Feng Jiao shook his head and said, forget it, I'll have to trouble you to help me bring something to your mother. Mo Wuyu nodded, only to see Feng Jiao take out a walnut-sized purple luminous pearl and place it in her hand. Mo Wuyu looked at the item in her hand and frowned, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. Very quickly, Mo Wuyu remembered that her mother indeed had a luminous pearl that was similar to this one. The only difference was that the string that her mother wore was light red, but this one was dark blue. When she was young she had asked her mother for it, but her mother, who had always doted on her, didn't give it to her. Uncle Feng, don't worry, Wuyu will definitely bring it to you. Mo Wuyu nodded and promised. Feng Jiao squeezed out a bitter smile and said, thank you, goodbye. Looking at Feng Jiao's bleak figure as he left, Mo Wuyu sighed deeply. He was rejected again. A black-clothed youth landed lightly on the wall, smiling as he held his chin and looked at Feng Jiao's departing figure. I would rather destroy 10 temples than regret a marriage. I really didn't expect that I would have to be a matchmaker one day. I don't know how Feng San will repay me. He will definitely be moved to tears and be deeply grateful to me, and then swear that he will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire, right? He will try his best to restrain himself from killing you. On the wall, another youth who was younger by 1 or 2 years, said expressionlessly, little brother Jirue, can't you have a bottom line for being ungrateful? How hard is my life to meet a cousin like you who would burn the bridge after crossing the river? Little Prince Mo complained. Su Jirue's mouth twitched and he asked gloomily, why do I have to cross the river? Cousin, do you still remember? Digging a hole for someone to jump into and then pulling that person out, wanting them to be grateful? Did Mo Xiaobao think that everyone in the world had the same problem as him? Mo Xiaobao rubbed his nose and sighed, I don't care anymore. For the future of young Master Feng San, let's do it. And Hua. Inside the room, Hua Yunqi was staring at the night pearl that Mo Wuyo had given her. Outside the door, Mo Xiaobao's anxious voice could be heard. Without waiting for Hua Yunqi to speak, Mo Xiaobao directly barged in. Auntie Hua, have you seen Feng San? Hua Yunqi was stunned. She looked at Mo Wuyo and said, he just left. What's wrong? He left. Xiaobao screamed in horror. Why did he leave? Where did he go? What happened? Hua Yunqi's heart tightened as she hastily asked. Mo Xiaobao's face was heavy. It's over. He must have felt that there was no business and found a place to fend for himself. Quickly, we must send someone to find him as soon as possible. Mr. Shin said that his illness can't be delayed any longer. Illness? What illness does he have? Hua Yunqi's face paled as she anxiously asked Mo Xiaobao. Standing behind her, Mo Wuyo furrowed his brows in confusion. She had just seen Feng Jiao. Although his complexion wasn't good, it didn't look like he had any illness. Mo Xiaobao weakly shook his head and said, Mr. Shin didn't say. He only said that he might not live past 3 months. Feng San just told my royal father that he wanted to leave for a period of time and then ran away. Royal father and mother are currently sending people to look for him. They told me to come over and see if he came here. Hua Yunqi's body swayed and she almost fell to the ground. Mo Wuyo quickly supported her. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Mo Xiaobao give him a look. Hesitating for a moment, Hua Yunqi asked, Wuyo, What else did he say when he left? Mo Huio really couldn't bear to lie to his mother, but he also didn't want to ruin Mo Xiaobao's plan, so he could only say, nothing. Uncle Feng-san only told Huio to give this to mother. Hua Yunxi somewhat trembled as she took out another pearl. 2 almost identical purple night pearls lay quietly in her hands, releasing a gentle and beautiful light. The same old silk ribbon, the same concentric knot, only one was light red and the other dark blue. It was clear that they were a pair. Hua Yunxi suddenly remembered that rainy night many years ago. The youth's stubborn and dim eyes and pale face. Seeing Hua Yunxi's stunned gaze, Mo Xiaobao's eyes turned and with a trace of sobbing he said, Feng-san told royal father that he wanted to do what he wanted to do the most. And Hua, do you know what Feng-san wants to do the most? Where did he go? She knew but she chased him away. I'll go find him. Saying this, Hua Yunxi turned and rushed out. In the room behind her, Mo Xiaobao put down his hand that was covering his face. His handsome face was clean and full of smiles. Where was the trace of tears? Mo Huio knit his brows and stared at Mo Xiaobao. What do you want to do now? Mo Xiaobao smiled obediently and innocently. Big sister Huio, don't you think they're wasting everyone's time and energy like this? What does this have to do with you? Mo Huio silently said in his heart. Mo Xiaobao helplessly sighed. He looked at the bright and sad sky outside the window. Last time he played with Feng-san, causing Feng-san to be dispirited at work during this time. His heartless royal father thought it was all his fault, so he wanted him to immediately solve all of Feng-san's problems. In all honesty, even if he didn't cause trouble, Feng-san wouldn't be able to deal with Aunt Hua, alright? Will this work? Mo Huio said with some doubt. If it's like this, Feng-san will use this as a pretext to make a fuss. Then he can go die. Mo Xiaobao said expressionlessly. Forcing others to take responsibility for a mistake that wasn't their own, this was too unreasonable. At the edge of a cliff somewhere outside Glass City, Hua Yunxi asked the nearby citizens along the way. Just as she walked up the cliff, she saw Feng Jiao standing at the edge of the cliff with his back facing her. He stood in the wind as if a gust of wind could blow him down. Jiao, what are you doing? Along the way, Hua Yunxi was slightly out of breath. But seeing the red figure on the cliff, her heart instantly jumped and she didn't even dare to breathe. Feng Jiao turned around and looked at her. Big sister Hua, why are you here? Hua Yunxi said gently, what are you doing here? If there's anything, come over first and we can talk about it slowly, okay? Feng Jiao smiled bitterly, there's nothing to talk about. I was insensible in the past and made big sister Hua worry. In the future, I won't do it again. Seeing his seemingly withered appearance, Hua Yunxi only felt a pain in her heart as if someone was ruthlessly pinching it. Jiao, no matter what, let's slowly think of a way it will get better. Can you come over first? I'm a little scared of you standing there. Feng Jiao shook his head and smiled, it's good here. Big sister Hua, you can go back. In the future, Jiao won't bother you anymore. After saying that, Feng Jiao turned around and leaned forward slightly. Jiao. Hua Yunxi couldn't help but scream and wanted to reach out and grab him. But the place where she was standing was not close to Feng Jiao. If Feng Jiao really wanted to die, she wouldn't be able to grab him in time. Moreover, with her figure and strength, she definitely wouldn't be able to hold Feng Jiao. A sense of fear that she had never felt before spread throughout her body and mind. Jiao, didn't you say that you would take care of me? Are you going back on your words? Feng Jiao paused for a moment and slowly shook his head. In the future, I won't be able to take care of big sister Hua for a long time. It's okay. It'll be as long as it takes. And who can say what will happen in the future? Hua Yunxi said nervously. Feng Jiao turned around and looked at her. Big sister Hua, are you pitying me again? Just like when we were young. Hua Yunxi shook her head and said, no. Cow, I'm sorry. I was wrong before. I was the one who cared about other people's opinions. I know. I know that you are sincere to me. Then, what about me? Feng Jiao asked expectantly. Hua Yunxi hesitated for a moment. Holding the 2 pearls in her hand, she said firmly, I can't guarantee that. I have such thoughts now, but I want to try. Jiao, are you willing to try with me? Even if I can only say it for 3 months. Hua Yunxi nodded solemnly. After a long time, Feng Jiao finally left the cliff and walked in the direction of Hua Yunxi. Hua Yunqi's anxious heart finally relaxed. Her legs went soft and she fell to the ground. She wasn't a woman with a strong body. All the way here she almost relied on her willpower. Now that she saw that Feng Jiao was fine, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She couldn't hold on any longer. Feng Jiao tapped his foot and flew to her side to catch her falling body. Big sister Hua. No, Yunqi, are you really willing to marry me? Hua Yunqi was stunned. Looking at Feng Jiao's expectant and joyful eyes, she couldn't say anything to refuse. Finally she nodded slightly. Really? It's great. Yunqi, I'm so happy. Feng Jiao hugged her tightly and couldn't help but laugh loudly. Mo Xiaobao and Su Jirui, who followed Hua Yunqi all the way here, lazily leaned against a tree at the foot of the mountain. Mo Xiaobao's handsome face was twisted. Feng Jiao, isn't it too early to be happy? Su Jirui lazily glanced at him. Shouldn't you be happy that you got what you wanted? Are you jealous? Shouldn't he first consider what to do if he doesn't die in 3 months? Mo Xiaobao gritted his teeth. This was his idea, his plan, okay? What happened to gratitude? What happened to being deeply grateful? What happened to being willing to sacrifice himself? Young Master Feng San, who was holding his beloved on the cliff, didn't have the heart to think about what to do in 3 months. He only knew that after so many years he finally caught the beautiful figure that he once yearned for and couldn't get. Since the first time he saw her, he felt that something was missing in his heart. At this moment, it suddenly became full, warm and full. Hua Yunqi leaned weakly against Feng Jiao's arms, without any intention of struggling. In this world, no man's feelings for her were more real than Feng Jiao's. No man could make her feel such heart-wrenching pain like Feng Jiao's. That was enough. When you know your concubine has a husband, you give your concubine a pair of pearls. When I feel your lingering love, it's tied to the red silk basket. When my concubine's house is surrounded by tall buildings, my husband holds a halberd in the light. I know your heart is like the sun and the moon, we swear to live and die together. When you shed your tears, I regret not meeting you before marriage. Chapter 1141. When Mo Xiaobao was 15 years old, after His Highness Prince Ding passed the throne to Mo Xiaobao, he brought his princess consort and the little princess who was only 6 years old and left Glass City without leaving a trace. What he left behind for Mo Xiaobao was a huge Prince Ding mansion and the largest piece of land in the world, as well as a tearful little brother who was looking for his mother and sister everywhere. There was nothing for Mo Xiaobao to worry about in the Prince Ding mansion's affairs. A year ago he had already started to take over the Prince Ding mansion's affairs. These matters were something that would happen sooner or later. But looking at the little brat who was crying while hugging his leg, Mo Xiaobao could only sigh helplessly. He bent over and picked up the little brother, saying helplessly, "Now you know how to cry. Why didn't you let father take you with him? Even if he had to leave one behind for him to raise, leaving X and behind was also good. Why would this little brat with snot stay behind?" Mo Xiaobao said in disdain in his heart. "Father is bad." Little Mo Yufeng sniffled and pouted, "I want to be a great general. I don't want to fall to the point where I can't even afford to eat." Hearing this, Mo Xiaobao's eyes twitched. He roughly understood that his heartless father was lying again. However, wasn't this little brother a bit too stupid? He wasn't so easy to fool when he was 6. Forget it, I'll teach him slowly. Otherwise he won't even know when he's sold off and still have to count the money for them. Thus, the 15-year-old Mo Xiaobao started his life as a stay-at-home dad before he even got married. Prince Ding, who was in his prime, left the young prince behind. No, it should be said that the new Prince Ding ran off without a trace. This caused the surrounding countries to become restless. Even if Mo Xiaobao was a genius, he was only 15 years old. How could he manage such a huge family business like the Prince Ding mansion? One had to know that even Mo Xiaobao was rolling on the battlefield when he was 15 years old. Should they use this chance to test Mo Xiaobao's reaction and Mo Xiaobao's ability? On the other hand, the minds of many people in Glass City were once again active. The former Prince Ding refused to take a concubine and was unwilling to ascend the throne. But what did the new young prince think? Which ambitious man wouldn't want to rule the world? Grasping the power of the world while sober and lying on the knees of beautiful women while drunk could be said to be the highest goal of any ambitious man in the world. Now, a 15-year-old brat had obtained it effortlessly. How could he not have any thoughts about it? Thus, there were more and more people moving around in Glass City. At this time, the world still didn't know that the new little Prince Mo Xiaobao of the Prince Ding mansion, who had no moral integrity, was lying in the backyard of the mansion playing with his younger brother. "Brother, are you getting married?" Mo Yufeng was lying in front of the sand table, pondering how to fight with his brother as he blinked his eyes and asked. Although Mo Xiaobao was only 15 years old, his figure was no less than that of an adult. It was just that with the combination of Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li's good looks, his delicate and handsome face made him show the childishness that a youth of his age should have. However, Mo Xiaobao didn't mind that his appearance didn't have the majesty of a king. Majesty wasn't something that could be gained by relying on looks. Pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger was too satisfying. Lazily sitting on the ground, Mo Xiaobao glanced at his younger brother and said, "Did someone ask you?" Yes. Mo Yufeng excitedly laid on his brother's body and said with a smile, "Many people asked me." "What did you say?" Mo Yufeng opened his big innocent eyes and said, "I said brother said that you want to be a couple for life." "It's a couple for life." Mo Xiaobao corrected and then patted his younger brother's head in praise. "Well said." Mo Yufeng smiled and said, "Of course. I definitely won't tell anyone that you went to a brothel and had a few women." Mo Xiaobao expressionlessly pressed his younger brother's face into the carpet. What kind of brat was this? "Yo, you're abusing your younger brother again." Outside the door, Feng Jiao's laughing voice sounded. Mo Yufeng raised his head and smiled as he struggled to get up from Mo Xiaobao's body and continued to pounce on him. Mo Xiaobao's expression didn't change as he used his hand to suppress him. He raised his head to look at Feng Jiao and asked, "Uncle Feng, what's the matter?" Feng Jiao waved the booklet in his hand and said, "Your uncle asked me to bring it over." "What's written in it?" Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and gave him a look that said, "You already know the answer." Mo Xiaobao opened it to take a look. Sure enough, if it wasn't an invitation for the prince to ascend the throne, it was an invitation for the prince to get married. There was no lack of praises for the prince. Looking at it, Mo Xiaobao wondered if he was really a god descending from the heavens. He casually threw the booklet to Mo Yufeng to play with. Mo Xiaobao said, "Ask them who wants to ascend the throne. Let them come up with a booklet. I will give the position to him." Feng Jiao's mouth twitched. "They are inviting you to ascend the throne, okay?" Forget about his father being black-hearted, his son wasn't easy to deal with either. The moment he opened his mouth, he accused others of wanting to rebel. "Since it's my business, what does it have to do with them whether I ascend the throne or not? If they have nothing to do, they should think of how to kill Mo Swain for I." Mo Xiaobao rolled his eyes and said, "What's wrong with the little emperor in the south? I haven't heard of it." In these few years, the little emperor in the south worked very hard. The entire small imperial court in Jiangnan was also very obedient. Especially in the last 2 years, the little emperor finally really took power. He had some intentions of working hard to govern just like the ruler of a resurgence. Mo Xiaobao disdainfully spat out, "What else can it be? He's ambitious and wants to reclaim the country." In these few years, the Prince Ding mansion had been recuperating and had no intention of sending troops to the outside world. These people couldn't have forgotten how sharp the swords of the Mahist army's cavalry were in just a few years, right? Actually, Mo Xiaobao was also clear that it was because he was too young and couldn't suppress people. If his father and mother were here, those people could only shrink back no matter how many thoughts they had. It was also because he knew that Mo Xiaobao was even more displeased. Student Mo Xiaobao was a child with great ambitions. Sooner or later, this prince will beat you until you cry for your father and call for your mother. "Brother, be good, Lin, or will help you beat them." Mo Yufeng struggled in his arms and comforted him. Mo Xiaobao sadly looked at his little brother who was like a little bean sprout. "When you can beat them, it will take at least 8 or 9 years. Mo Yufeng was not convinced, his big eyes bulging. "I will grow up very quickly. You're picky, naughty, running all over the place. It will take at least 10 years to grow up. 8 or 9 years is already my underestimation. When I fought with you, I was already this tall." Mo Xiaobao casually gestured, making Mo Yufeng look up. Looking at his brother's height, then looking at himself. I'm not picky anymore." Mo Yufeng whispered. "That's a good child. Picky eaters won't grow tall. You have to know, even if you are the young master of the Prince Ding mansion, being short doesn't have a future. If you go to the battlefield and need someone to carry you on a horse, In the future when you marry a wife you can't even reach her shoulder. What are you going to do? Chapter 1142. I'll go eat now. Mo Yufeng ran away in tears. Little prince, isn't it a bit unkind of you to lie to the second young master like this? Feng Jiao coughed. It wasn't just unkind, it was simply wicked. Mo Xiaobao disdainfully said, I haven't been fooled by father's childish words since I was 3 years old. He's already 6 years old. So you also know how to be childish. But in terms of scheming, Mo Yufeng wasn't as scheming as Mo Xiaobao. Ever since Mo Xiaobao could speak he had been tricked and mocked by Mo Xiao in all kinds of ways. During this time, there were also the great gods of the Su family who took turns lecturing him. It was hard not to become black. In comparison, although little friend Mo Yufeng was a bit narrow-minded, his days were much more comfortable. So it wasn't surprising that he was naive and easy to fool. Mo Xiaobao expressed that he didn't hate his father for tricking him into eating too much meat and not being able to find a wife in the future. He was only concerned about his younger brother. After little friend Mo Yufeng was beaten away by his unscrupulous older brother, Feng Jiao walked into the hall and asked, Then what are your plans for the wedding? Mo Xiaobao was almost 16 years old and had officially taken over Prince Ding's position. At this age it was indeed time to get married. In this world it was important to first start a family and then start a career. Other than the unexpected situation back then, most people would get married around this age. If those old pedants used this to persuade him it would be hard to say. But Feng Jiao glanced at Mo Xiaobao. This kid didn't look like someone who knew his place even more than his father. He probably wouldn't be so easily manipulated. Mo Xiaobao didn't reject the topic of the wedding at all. He smiled and said, Didn't Lin Er already announce it for me? One person for life. Let them send the person over. The one I like is Princess Ding. Looking at his kind smile, Feng Jiao only felt his scalp go numb. He asked, Then what about those you don't like? A pair for life, no matter whether or not anyone believed it, but it would definitely make many people's imaginations run wild. After all, the previous Prince Ding, who had just stepped down from his position, had only been with one woman for the rest of his life. Even though Ding Wangfei's maternal family, the Yi family, did not gain any benefits, but the 5 young masters of Ding Wangfei's external family, the Su family, all held power in their hands. In the past, the Su family only had a third-rank imperial censor in the imperial court. Now they had become the prime minister and led the army to dominate the world in less than 10 years. All of this was because the Su family had a good granddaughter. Just to gamble on the glory of the world's #1 aristocratic family, the entire Glass City would probably rush to send their daughters and granddaughters to the Prince Ding mansion. Don't like. Mo Xiaobao rubbed his chin. After thinking for a while he said, Don't worry, it won't go to waste. That general has military merits and some minister will reward him. Who knows when we'll have a marriage alliance or something. Our Prince Ding mansion doesn't have a girl, right? Now we have one. Young Master Feng San's face immediately darkened. Who would have nothing better to do to send a girl to be wasted like this? Although girls weren't as valuable as boys, they weren't picked up for free. Little Prince Mo's mouth just moved and he wanted people to give up their carefully raised girl to be used as a reward? Seeing that young Master Feng San didn't say anything, Mo Xiaobao clapped his hands and smiled. You also think it makes sense, right? Then let's do it. I'm only here to run an errand and deliver a booklet. What do you mean I think it makes sense? Young Master Feng San could foresee that if these words were to spread, the roof of his house would be torn down by the angry crowd. Young Master Feng San's guess wasn't accurate. Even if little Prince Mo's words were to spread, the people who wanted to send their daughters to the Prince Ding mansion were still scrambling like ducks. Ever since they realized that it was useless to push their daughters to Mo Xiuyao, all the aristocratic families held back and tried to push their daughters to the younger ones. Especially now that His Highness Prince Ding, who was feared by many, had abdicated, and the 15-year-old heir had succeeded the throne. He was at the age where he was lustful and admired young women. Perhaps his own daughter was the one who had moved the heir's heart? For a single girl, it was worth it to gamble the family's decades of glory, even if there was only a 1 in 100 or even a 1 in a few thousand. In the study of the Su estate, Su Qingyan was leaning on a chair and telling his older brother the rumors outside. As he spoke he couldn't stop laughing while holding his stomach. Big brother, among the girls who have been in the limelight recently, which one do you think is the most promising one? Young Master Chen put down the booklet in his hand and glanced at his younger brother indifferently. I think you're just bored and need to be taught a lesson. Big brother, why do you say that? Our family's door is about to be broken by people these days. Even eldest sister-in-law's clinic is overcrowded every day. Didn't you see that eldest sister-in-law didn't even open her clinic these days? Su Chen looked up. He couldn't care less about how those people wanted to make trouble, but if they disturbed his family's normal life he couldn't allow it. Isn't that right? I'm also surrounded by people asking me questions every day when I go out. These people want to know so much, why don't they just ask little Mo? Su Qingyan said with some annoyance. Even if he liked crowds, it wasn't a good thing to be surrounded by people all day. Su Qingchen pondered for a moment and said, you can tell them to bring those girls back home early. There's no hope. If I say that, do you think I'll be beaten to death in the streets? Su Qingyan asked hesitantly. After saying that, he looked at Su Qingchen curiously. Big brother, you mean that little Mo doesn't plan to get married at all? Young Master Qingchen said indifferently, even if he originally wanted to get married he wouldn't want to after these people brought it up first and caused such a ruckus. If those people think that little Mo is easier to fool than Mo Xiuyao, I'm afraid they'll be in big trouble. Little Mo was obviously playing with these people. Mo Xiuyao's style was clean and neat. He knew how to play dirty, but he actually had no interest in deliberately playing with people. However, little Mo obviously didn't know how he developed such a bad interest. Occasionally, young Master Qingchen would reflect on whether there was any problem with the Su family's education. In the end, the conclusion was that it was all Mo Xiuyao's problem. A crooked stick would have a crooked shadow. Su Qingyan clicked his tongue. However, when he thought about his nephew's big black eyes that seemed to emit kindness and innocence at all times, but the things he did were so outrageous, fifth young Master Su couldn't help but shudder. He silently prayed for those unlucky people in his heart. Chapter 1143. The news that the little prince of the Prince Ding mansion was going to choose a consort had unknowingly spread throughout the world. As a result, it wasn't just the nobles of Glass City who were excited. Even the powerful and influential people of other regions and neighboring countries were excited. Xiling, Southern Chu, and a few small kingdoms of the western regions had sent envoys to express their intentions of making peace through marriage. As for the influential nobles who belonged to Prince Ding's household, they were even more directly bringing their daughters and hurrying to Glass City. These people's thoughts were very simple. It would be best if they were chosen and their families would rise to the top. It didn't matter if they weren't chosen. They would just treat it as going to Glass City to see the world. Glass City was not only the capital of the Prince Ding mansion, but also a place where the countries of the western regions interacted with the Central Plains. Its reputation had long surpassed that of the Chu capital of the past, Guangling of the previous dynasty, and Nanjing of the present Southern Chu. It had the grandeur of the #1 city of the Central Plains. On the crowded streets of Glass City, several youths of similar ages strolled through the crowd. Although their clothes were not eye-catching, their handsome appearances still attracted the attention of many passers-by. Mo Xiaobao touched his face with satisfaction. Qi Lin's disguise was indeed very good. No one recognized him on the streets. He turned back to look at Qin Ran, Su Jirui and Leng Junhan, and nodded with satisfaction. The four of them had all grown up in Glass City. The people of Glass City were very familiar with them. Especially Mo Xiaobao. Ever since he inherited the position of Prince Ding, he would encounter all kinds of coincidental encounters every time he went out. Mo Xiaobao sadly discovered that although he had become the master of the Prince Ding mansion, the large Glass City was no longer the place where he could go to play as he wanted when he was young. As a result, in less than half a year, Mo Xiaobao had developed the habit of disguising himself when he went out. Why do I feel that the streets are especially lively? Glass City was very prosperous, but were there this many people? Mo Xiaobao said in a daze as he looked at the crowded silk shops, jewelry shops and cosmetics shops. Could it be that his governance was so good that the population of Glass City had increased by so much in such a short time? Su Jirui, who was following behind him, glanced at him indifferently and mercilessly shattered his fantasy. Stop dreaming. Isn't it all because of you? Over the past few days, The threshold of the Su mansion had almost been broken by people. Everywhere he went, people would ask him all sorts of questions. Young Master Su was a little angry. Me? Xiaobao looked at Su Jirui innocently. What did I do? Lung Junhan smiled from ear to ear and watched the various beauties coming and going. She said, "Isn't His Highness Prince Ding going to choose a concubine? These young ladies are all preparing for the consort selection banquet." Regardless of whether or not a qualified princess consort could be chosen, at least the silk, rouge, powder and jewelry businesses in Glass City had made a huge profit recently. From this aspect, Mo Xiao Prince still had some achievements. Consort selection banquet? What is that? Mo Xiaobao was at a loss. The other three looked at each other and silently stared at Mo Xiaobao. After a while, Qin Lai asked, "Don't tell me you didn't plan on choosing a consort at all?" Mo Xiaobao snorted proudly and said, "What consort selection? I was just saying. Did I officially send out the order? Did I send out a notice? I don't think so. It's clearly these people who think too highly of themselves." The group of four secretly hid in a tea house on the busiest street of Glass City. Looking down from the window above, they could see the situation on the other side of the street. "That seems to be Lord Wei's third young lady." Lung Junhan leaned against the window and said excitedly, "Wei's third young lady is now known as Glass City's #1 beauty. I didn't think she would also come." Mo Xiaobao looked outside with disinterest. Glass City's #1 beauty? She was just so. She wasn't even as pretty as his mother and his aunts. The only thing that could be said was that she was older than them. She smiled. "I remember that Lord Wei's family background is average. Yuhan Pavilion's things aren't cheap. Send someone to investigate. If there's a problem, confiscate their house." Hearing Mo Xiaobao's words, Lung Junhan immediately lost interest in the #1 beauty. She turned around and leaned against the table, excitedly discussing with Mo Xiaobao. "That's right. We can send someone to record what they bought and then check the accounts. We can definitely catch many corrupt officials." Mo Xiaobao propped up his chin and seriously considered the possibility of this matter. At the side, Su Jirui said with a headache, "You should first consider what you will do if Western Hill and Southern Chu really send a princess over for a political marriage." Political marriage? Southern Chu won't send a princess over, right? Southern Chu and the Prince Ding mansion were originally one family. Aunt Wang Fei lost, so close relatives couldn't marry. Qin Lai said with a smile, "Speaking of which, the Prince Ding mansion and Southern Chu's blood relations are very distant. Maybe Mo Suiyun really will send you a princess." Mo Suiyun and Mo Xiaobao were about the same age and were both young masters. Although the two of them hadn't started fighting yet, Qin Lai could already imagine the scene of them fighting in the future. Mo Xiaobao rubbed his chin and chuckled, "It's fine if they send one over. Aren't you both still engaged? How about one princess each?" "I don't want to." Lung Junhan was the first to object, righteously saying, "This young master is already engaged to little sister Exenr for life. This young master wants to preserve little sister Exenr's chastity." Bullshit. Mo Xiaobao's thin and elegant lips spat out extremely rude words. "Who agreed to you marrying Exenr? If you dare to ruin I's little Exenr's reputation again, I will give you to an ugly, fat and hot-tempered hag." Lung Junhan immediately covered her mouth and hid behind Su Jirui's hand. Mo Xiaobao's thoughts were too frightening. What was even more frightening was that he really dared to put his thoughts into practice. Lung Junhan didn't want to see a 7-foot-tall, black, fat hag with buck teeth when she returned home that day. Frightened by her own thoughts, Lung Junhan's handsome little face turned green and white. Reporting to the prince, the Southern Chu envoy requests an audience. Outside the room, a guard hurriedly came to report. Mo Xiaobao looked up. "Southern Chu envoy? What's the matter?" The guard handed over a gilded invitation and said, "Emperor Chu is getting married. The prince is invited to attend the ceremony." Mo Xiaobao took the invitation with interest. It was indeed written on the invitation that Emperor Chu Mo Suiyun would marry the granddaughter of the Grand Tutor of Southern Chu, Lady Qian, as his empress. The little emperor is getting married? Should we go and take a look? Little emperor? Mo Suiyun? Lung Junhan asked without much interest. He actually didn't have any impression of Mo Suiyun, so naturally he had long forgotten that he had cheated him. Of course, young Master Ling might not even think that he had cheated him. More than 5 years ago, None of them had taken Mo Suiyun seriously. However, in the past few years, Mo Suiyun had been playing very well in southern Chu, fighting the court officials and the Empress Dowager. Now he was not even 20 years old, but he had almost grasped the power of more than half of the southern Chu court in his hands. This made Mo Xiaobao start to pay attention to this little emperor who had once been praised by his lord father. As for Mo Suiyun, he seemed to have gradually understood the joy of fighting against the heavens, fighting against the earth, and fighting against people. This year he started to provoke Mo Xiaobao, who was as young as him, from afar. Although he didn't do anything excessive, Mo Xiaobao still keenly sensed the hostility of this little emperor who had once run away from home with him to play. Because of this, Mo Xiaobao was silently sad for a quarter of an hour. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.